have to look at that.
1 minute.
702.
We live in Melbourne, but it's still summer.
702 4th Street. What's the crossroad at 702?
What's the what?
Oh, I'd asked Alex to send me where that person lived. It's kind of hard to get a flavor for where the noise violation is when you don't know where they live.
Ah,
So he sent me the address, and I can't picture in my mind where the 700 block of
But if the air conditioner's not,
4th Street is.
but if it's not noisy, like, you know what I mean? If it meets the noise requirements, the fact that it's between two buildings.
Well, you know what? Today, I even loaded up on my phone the best app for decibels, because I walked into my office today and the hospital's doing work there. It's been going on for like 6 weeks. Nobody keeps coming back in, but they've got the air recirculators hooked up. I went home and I got my noise canceling headphones today to wear so I could work.
good
in the
evening and
office.
welcome everybody to the regular meeting of Nelson City Council on August 13th. Thanks to everybody who's in attendance tonight, and thanks for showing up, council, even though it's summer holidays. I'll begin with our Aboriginal Acknowledgement. The City of Nelson acknowledges all Aboriginal people on whose traditional territories we stand. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. There are no late items tonight, but before we adopt the agenda, I would like to ask council, we're going to amend the order a bit to move item 11C to 7F. So under 7F, you would have council indemnity policy, and under 11C, where is it? Just a minute here. Yeah, we're just,
Sorry, 10C.
10C.
10C. You're going to have, yeah, that just gets reordered. Okay.
And I'm,
10F.
Madam Mayor, I'm just wondering if you would like to also move 10F.
10F, the flag policy
Because we
to,
know there are a number of people here.
yeah,
who
that are
interested
here.
in that.
Well, it would be nice if we could make them stay for the whole meeting. Nice if they'd be here. So where would we like to put that? Under,
Your council's choice, if you would like to put that before or after the council indemnity.
how about if we do it before?
Okay.
So
What's that make it?
the
That makes
flag
F
policy?
and indemnity G.
Okay, so the flag policy will be F, and the council indemnity policy will be G.
G.
Okay? All right, so all done with that. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Councillor Daly, seconded by Councillor Warmington. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. We have minutes of meetings from July 9th, regular meeting, special regular meeting of July 9th, a public hearing on July 9th, and special regular meeting on July 23rd. Could I have move adoption? Thank you, Councillor Morrison, second by Councillor Daly. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And now we have, we'll move to item 7A, which is a request from Wildflower School to, as these is kindergarten to grade 2, to retain in the observation beehive that council approved in 2017. So there's a motion here. They'd like to continue raising bees. And the motion reads that council approves the request by Wildflower School to retain a honeybee observation hive in their kindergarten grade 2 classroom, and that the observation hive will be permitted to remain in place until amendments to the Animal Regulation and Control Bylaw are completed, on the condition that the city does not receive any complaints from the public pertaining to the honeybee observation hive. Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Second by Councillor Warmington. Sorry about that, Councillor Purcell. I almost caught you there. And is there any discussion? Councillor Purcell, do you have any discussion on this item?
No, I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The Nelson Nordic Ski Club is looking for a letter of support. And I'm just going to move to the resolution here. That council directs staff to prepare a letter of support for the Nelson Nordic Ski Club to replace the ski lodge with an energy-efficient, multi-use, multi-seasonal building. Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Seconder, Councillor Morrison. Discussion on this? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Cooney Kids. This one was tough. All right. The Cooney Kids would like to partner with the city to develop a childcare center. And there's a resolution here that the Cooney Kids Society request for either land or city building be forwarded to the 2019 Strategic Priority Setting Meeting of Council. Does that make sense? Okay, Councillor Warmington, second by Councillor Morrison. Is there a discussion on that? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thought exchange. Thought exchange is also looking for a letter of support. And the recommendation is that council direct staff to prepare a letter of support for the Thought Exchange application for their application to the BC Export Awards in the Advancing Technology and Innovation category.
So
Thank
moved.
you, Councillor Morrison, or Councillor Morrison, sorry, Councillor Sherbo. So Councillor Morrison was really quick on the draw there a couple of times. I got it. And do I have a seconder? That would be Councillor
Sure.
Morrison? No, that would be Councillor
Councillor
Purcell. Is there discussion on this? Yes, Councillor,
Trail business, is it?
a trail business, okay.
No, they were Roslyn based. They have, I forget how many employees. They have more than a dozen employees in Nelson. Yeah, so they're I guess a West Kootenay company now. And,
West Regional.
and
yeah.
yeah,
So they're regional. Thanks for that clarification. Any further questions or just debate? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Now we move on to our flag policy. So I'm just going to go down in my and I'm going to have staff report on this a bit too, because staff has is going to be providing us some information here. Where the heck was this?
Where was that?
I'm sorry. I'm just,
10C.
it was 10B, is that okay?
10F.
It was 10.
It was.
I thought it was 10F, yeah.
Thank you. I found it. Thank you. All right. So the reason that this policy is coming forward is that we've never had a formal guideline for flying of any flags whatsoever, and staff was directed to do a policy, and this is some time ago. So the policy is just coming forward now, and we understand that there is some concern in the community about what this means, and I'm going to have a staff report on this.
Sure. So what we did, we followed our normal course of action on this, is that we did research about what is the common practice in the province. And so what came back is that the majority of folks, the purpose of the poles, the flag poles that are in front of your City Hall, or for the purpose of flying the Canadian flag, the provincial flag, and the city flag. In the communities where they feel that there is a need or a desire to have the opportunity for the community to fly flags, that there is a separate pole for that. So right now, it would be up to council if they wanted to consider in the next budget next year if you wanted to do that for a community pole, but we went with best practice in the province at this time and said that the purpose of the flag poles that are in front of City Hall are the purpose of flying the flags that are there. So, and that's how the policy came back. And it also deals with how we fly it at half-mast and that sort of thing, and when we put it up and for whom we do it for.
Thank you. So are there questions for staff? Go ahead, Councillor Sherbo.
Well, I disagree with that. I disagree with the policy. For a number of years, Bob Adams and a couple of times I've attended raising the Métis flag on the pole in front of City Hall. So it's not that it hasn't been used for, I think they took down the Nelson flag and put up the Métis flag. So I'm opposed to any change in this policy, or change to this new policy.
So, Councillor, can I ask you if would you have any opposition to us putting up an extra pole so that we wouldn't have to remove the city of?
No, I wouldn't have an opposition, but as you said that, or as Francis said, that would come up in budget debate, which may miss some opportunities from now on.
Thank you, Councillor. Other discussion?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Purcell.
Yeah, I share Councillor Sherbo's concern. I mean, I think it would be great to have a community poll. I worry that it may get lost in a budget session and then we just would wind up with this policy. I feel like it's important for us to be more permeable to community and to be warm and, and proudly who we are. And there are lots of examples of communities around us, and like near and far, who, take down their municipal flag and fly community flags on special occasions. Or I think there's a kind of a gizmo you can get that attaches another flag to the pole so that you can fly another one. Like we could fly the Pride flag below the City of Nelson flag if we wanted to. I think there are other solutions, but I'm opposed to us not flying community flags, and I'm concerned about us waiting until we have a community pole. I think it would be great to recommend to the next council to erect a community pole, but in the meantime, I don't think that we should be banning community flags.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Warmington.
Yes, I like the idea of flying community flags, but I do have some concerns. We go back to our banner policy and how much work that has been for council, and I think we would need similar supporting policy here because these things tend to become contentious in community, and it's difficult for council to draw the line and choose who or what. And I'm talking in really general terms, have nothing against flying the Pride flag by any stretch. But I do think from a larger policy perspective, we need to consider what a can of worms this is going to be for us, or the potential for it to be a can of worms.
Any thoughts on an extra poll?
I would support the extra poll, but again, I think we're kind of coming back to who do we say yes to, who do we say no to, on what basis do we decide whose flag gets flown, how do we deal with controversy in the community, as we know we have seen with the banner policy. Mm-hmm. And these are questions that we haven't really talked about or considered.
Thank you. Councillor Morrison, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I have to sort of go with what Councillor Warmington has said there in terms of having to have a policy then going forward. And I just want to acknowledge that I did have some communication with Stephanie Myers, who I see in the gallery, because I said, do you have some policies from other places? And I'm just looking at other reasons why people fly flags, and it does become a bit of a which flags do you fly. I looked at I went to the Vancouver one because that's where we always go in BC. We always look at Vancouver, and then they have areas where they have additional flags. And actually, in my correspondence with Ms. Myers, I had said, what about a community flagpole that was actually downtown as opposed to even in front of City Hall? I mean, there's other places to fly flags as well. I like the idea of a community pole. Again, it's about what do we do to get away from controversy. I just want to acknowledge the fact that I was on the council, the very first council that decided that the Pride banner could be hung across Baker Street. And let me tell you, that was one of the toughest decisions. That was right up there with the marijuana debate of this term, was the debate of whether or not to go forward with putting the Pride banner across Baker Street, which I fully supported at that time. So again, I have no issue in terms of Pride. The other thing is I also see now that we're flying in most jurisdictions the Pride and the transgendered flag as well. So I see it. I don't see a need maybe for just one pole, but potentially two poles, because I see those flags flying usually all the time now. Both the Pride and the transgendered flag are flown on separate poles. So it's not a particularly easy decision. Is there something that we can come to terms with, going with the fact that Pride is coming up soon? Can I go to Walmart and buy a flagpole and we can just attach it to the outside of the building and we can fly the flag?
So,
I mean, is there a way, if the importance is of hanging it off the city, to say that the city is welcoming, which the city, I do believe that all of us here are welcoming of all of the LGBTQ community, can we fly a flag off the building in some other manner for this year?
thank you, Councillor. Councillor Daly, did you have your hand up again? Okay.
Just a reminder, we don't actually have anything.
I know. So, Council, so I'm going to stop discussion at this point, and I'm just going to outline what I think I've heard, and then we should get some kind of a motion on the floor. So what I'm hearing Council say is that there is an interest in supporting community, But there's also a need to have a policy around the poles that we have outside City Hall. So in most jurisdictions, the staff recommendation came forward that we go with the policy that's followed, I think it's federally. Is it federally?
I'm not sure. We did our research in BC.
And so that's to fly the provincial, the federal, and the municipal flags on the flagpoles. That's what this policy discusses. That's the flags that are going to be flown here. But as in addition to that, there is discussion around flying other flags and when and if that should happen and how it might happen in a way that's supportive. So is anybody ready to put a motion on the floor?
I am, but I'd like to make an amendment to the staff motion.
Can I maybe just make a suggestion? Because
Okay.
what I'm hearing is, I don't think I'm hearing people are concerned with this policy in terms of when, things are flown at half-mast and all those things. I think what you're looking at is, can we make some exceptions? So you could pass this policy if it makes sense for what it's covering, and at least in an interim basis approve these other flags on a case-by-case basis until
we.
You decide whether you're going to have a community flag or pole, where it's going to go, et cetera, et cetera.
And we could always punt it to the next council, which is
Yeah.
a really good thing to do.
If
Okay,
people are
so-
comfortable with this
Yeah.
policy,
So-
you could adopt it, and then you could pass a
So
resolution.
before I, unless there's something new, Councillor.
I haven't spoken yet, so it wouldn't be,
Okay,
you're looking for a motion?
Yeah.
yep,
And we're dealing with this issue, but we've got also what's happening right now with a community group that's asked to fly their flag. And I want to address that before we do this, or it doesn't matter. I think that's important that we address that.
so the
Well, I think
suggestion,
you can pass this, and then council has the right to amend their policy to allow something, so.
Yeah.
So I think you can cover
But-
the other piece.
and.
Like, when would
One
we be
more,
amending
Councillor
that?
Purcell is, yeah, what's that, Councillor Purcell?
Well, I just don't, so if we pass this now, when would that amendment happen? Or
don't
would
think we
every
need an
individual group have to come to council and apply to have their flag flown? That seems like a lot of bureaucratic work to me.
No,
I don't
no,
think
no.
you need an amendment. All you need to do is
with
approve
it
an
now.
exception, yeah, right
We
now.
could do it right now.
Let me make a motion that then we can deal with the other one. And my motion is that we allow the pride flag to fly on our city flagpole underneath our Nelson city flag, showing Nelson support for pride. And it happened
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Morrison? All right, let's debate that. Is any,
So
any,
is this just for this year, or it period?
well, I think, let's deal with one thing at a time. Yeah,
Make
It
this
would
the
be helpful
exception.
if we said, are we talking about 2018 or are you talking about in perpetuity?
I'm talking about 2018, and then we can do the work of figuring out the policy for how this works.
so this would be for 2018, Councillor Purcell. It doesn't mean that the door slams shut, it just means that we're sorting things through right now. Okay, any further
You
discussion?
may want to address the Métis flag at the same time.
Well, the Métis flag isn't until next year that it would, I
If you
forget
wanna
the
approve
exact
that.
month.
Yeah,
June.
I doubt we're gonna have a
June, I
flagpole
think we have.
between now and then.
Really?
I did send a letter of request to actually speak for a moment or two.
This is at a business meeting, we don't usually do that unless you think things are really hitting the ditch and you're really panicked, then I might let you speak, but I think we're kind of,
I think I can save you a little bit of work though, because what a lot of cities do
Okay.
is they use the same policy that they have for street banners, what can and can't go up, that they do for flags.
thank
So
you,
you don't gotta redo it.
thanks. So we have a motion on the floor, did it get seconded?
Yeah.
Thank you,
Councillor-
that's right, Councilor Morrison seconded. Is there further debate on this motion? Councilor Sherbrooke?
Well, I was just gonna, we haven't passed it yet, so I
No.
would, if we could include the Métis flag for 2019 in the motion.
So that would have to be an amendment to the motion because it is on the floor right now as
Oh,
the way that
okay.
Van first and seconded from Councillor Daly.
So I'd move that amendment, that we allow the Métis flag to hang on the Nelson municipal flagpole for 2019.
Is there a seconder for that amendment?
Sure.
Thank you, Councillor Purcell. So speaking to the amendment, and is there further discussion on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment?
But one of the things that we didn't, if I could, we didn't talk about timelines. I mean, there's Pride Week or a Métis Week. Is that what we're talking about?
I think we should just leave it open.
Okay.
And like leave it, so then staff can work it out with their
Okay.
groups. Does that make sense? Like, let's not complicate it
Okay.
too much. So on the amendment, all in favor?
Sure.
Okay, on the main motion, so the amendment passes. The main motion, all in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, council. Do we need to pass a policy now?
I think you should.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing anybody's concern.
No, so now we're going to be, this is a policy about when it's half-mast and all of that stuff. So, all right, so could I have someone move the staff recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Is there a seconder? Oh. Is there something wrong with that one? Go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
No, it's just that, what was interesting, and it's only because the fact of one of the things that Ms. Myers sent me is the fact that we have within that flag policy about doing the injured workers, which is, I think, very important that we fly at half-mast. But I think one of the things that is also missing that I believe it's Prince George flies their flags at half-mast for recognition of the women that were massacred in December in respect in Montreal. And so I would just like to add that to the half-mast flyings.
So you're proposing an amendment to the policy that would include,
So we would have to, so what we would have to do is, so there's a
So we
couple of
refer
things we
back
can
to
do. We
staff?
can refer it back to staff and we can make those changes and then bring it back.
That's what you
That
need to
might be
do.
the
are you
easiest
moving
thing to do.
referral?
I'll move referral.
Who's seconding? Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Is there any discussion on referral? Yes.
Because it states in the policy you can't do that. That's why we need to do the referral. But I would also like to include the investigating a community flagpole on City Hall property for this purpose or
I don't know if
more.
that needs to be in the policy, but I think we're going to do that anyway.
Because my thought would be you would fly it, if we had another pole out there, that if we're flying a flag at half-mast, we're lowering all of those flags to half-mast. Like in terms of what this policy is doing, I just thought we missed a day there.
Okay.
So I think referral and then the community pole is a whole nother. All
when
flags fly
staff
at
comes
half-mast.
back, they will have added that day, that specific day, and if there's anything else that comes to mind, we'll figure that out too. But as well, staff will come back regarding the community poll and we'll have an idea of when that might happen. Does that make sense? No,
I don't think so.
you won't. You
Between
won't.
now and, no. I think you'll
So
be
so
part of
back to
it.
Plan B, which is to go, or Plan A, which is to refer it to the next council.
Yeah.
In the budget. Okay.
Well,
Like, if you want to track it, you can make a resolution and it'll be up to the next
And then
council.
it would be in the action tracking list and it could
Yeah.
carry forward.
So I have a motion on the floor for referral. Did I get it seconded?
Yeah,
Yes,
it
I
did get
second.
Thank
seconded,
you.
yeah.
So the motion to refer, I'm calling the question. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. And
If you want to,
another resolution?
to refer the exploration of additional
Flag.
flagpole, community flagpole, to the
And that's,
budget discussions of
yeah.
2019.
and Councillor Daly is making that motion, and who's seconding it?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, council, and thanks everybody for coming. I hope you don't just all run out the door. There's some really good stuff coming up on the agenda.
Indemnity. Stay for indemnity.
All right, council indemnity policy. So, where was that originally? It was on 10C, right?
Right.
So if you go to 10C that on your iPad, that's
Cleared the house.
oh yeah, we did.
Oh, Lord.
So, one of the things that happens at the end of a term, and our policy states, is that we call for an independent committee to be appointed by council and they make recommendations around council indemnity, which is what councilors are paid to do the work that they do for community. A committee was struck, and they've come back with their report. And we have a couple of recommendations around that report. So I'm not, is there someone who would like to move the first resolution is that the council indemnity policy, yes, thank you, Councillor Daly. And this is that it be adopted as amended on August 13th. And is anybody seconding? Seconding. Got it.
Need to put it on the floor if you want to amend it or anything.
So there's no seconder.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. So council has had the report, and I'm opening the floor for debate and discussion on this recommendation.
I would suggest that maybe Joanna go.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you are. Hi. So
Joanna worked with
Ms.
the
Markin worked with the committee, so she'll give her
committee struck by
report.
council.
And I'm going to read because there was quite a bit of information to go through. So
Thank you.
the committee appointed by council to review the indemnity policy met on 3 separate occasions to review the information provided by staff. This included information from 30 municipalities ranging in size from 1,813 people to 59,517 people. They reviewed benefit coverage, per diem rates, mileage rates, how annual increases were provided, childcare issues, and annual allowances for both council and mayor. The committee felt it was necessary to speak directly with mayor, council, and the city manager regarding their experience this term in office in order to get a better grasp of the challenges and time commitments they faced. Interviews with mayor and council were held prior to any decisions being made or recommendations being put forth. The information gathered from the interviews was contained in your packages. Information was also requested and obtained from the CFO regarding the implications of the federal government Budget 2017 decision to eliminate the tax exemption currently in place that allows 1/3 of the remuneration received by mayor and council to be tax exempt. It was felt by the committee that the elected officials should not be penalized by this change. Also, based on the remuneration paid to other municipalities with similar population and services, the workload of City of Nelson council members, the number of meetings, both formal and informal, they need to attend, and services provided in Nelson that are not provided in municipalities of the same size, it was agreed a recommendation should be made for an adjustment to the remuneration for both mayor and council. The committee gave consideration to the current dollar amount of the technology allowance and felt in order to be accessible and have the ability to deal with council matters, an increase of $500 was necessary for this one-time allowance. With regards to wage loss benefits, the committee looked at the current benefit of $125 per day and determined this equated to approximately $15.50 per hour and would not sufficiently cover wages for someone having to miss work in order to attend council business. With this said, they also felt additional clarity was needed to ensure those who are self-employed would have to demonstrate that they had in fact lost wages. The committee agreed to recommend an increase of $50 per day and a change to the existing language. And finally, in order to support council members with families, it was agreed to recommend a $150 per month childcare benefit to those on council who could demonstrate they were using this benefit.
Thank you. All right, council. Do you have any questions for Ms. Markin?
No.
No questions for Ms. Markin on the process or how it worked? All right, let's open the floor for debate. Councillor Sherbo.
So former councillor Donna McDonald was on the committee, and she said all the decisions were unanimous except for one, and she opposed the new stipends. And she says, I hope you understand the main increase for council for $2,000 is just to make councillors whole. As a result of having to pay taxes on 1/3 of the stipends that used to be tax exempt, the annual increase is only $666 per year, or about $55 per month. I believe that is an inadequate increase and does not reflect the contributions of council members. My proposal to the committee was to recommend to council that the goal of $25,000 per year for councillors be established and that it be phased in over the next 4 years. I still believe That is a far better and more fair approach. And then I'd just like to also add that the mayor's stipends got a 17.8% increase, and councillors' increase was 15.9%. So lower than what the mayor got. Even if you increased it to 17.8 for councillors, that still wouldn't adequately cover the taxes that are taken off.
Thank you, councillor.
Maybe we'll just clarify the taxes. I think, Colin, do you want to speak to that part?
Yeah, I believe when we looked at it not at the lowest rate, not at the highest rate, but in kind of the middle rate as far as what the tax effect would be on those that were having to, well, with the fact that council would be losing the 1/3. So again, I'm comfortable with the rate that we used, and depending, for some they may do better, and for some they may not do as well, depending on what tax bracket they're in. But we don't kind of pick and choose which tax bracket that we would use. We just sort of, as far as for each individual councillor, we try to pick one in the middle.
Thank you for that explanation. All right, further discussion on this.
I have something.
Go ahead, Councillor Purcell.
I got that letter from former councillor Donna McDonald too, and I actually agree with it. I think I would like to see the next council's wage raised to $25,000. It could be phased in over the 4 years, like she says. That's fine. For a number of different reasons, I think that the work is worth it, but also if we want to encourage a more inclusive council that includes younger people and people more in their prime earning years, we're just not going to do that unless we pay a little bit more money, and it's still not a great wage to live on. But if you can combine $25,000 a year with, you know, maybe some other flexible part-time work or contract work, then that begins to look more like a livable salary. But I think it's quite important for our council to be representative of the community, and I think this is one of the ways that we can encourage that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Warmington.
I would agree with Councillor Purcell. I have been tracking hours, and when I've added up all the additional meetings, all of the regular meetings, conferences, all of the stuff that we're expected to go to and required to go to, it works out to 27 hours a week approximately, which even with the increase that's proposed here is slightly under $14 an hour. It's pretty hard to, with the kind of scheduling that we have for council, hold down any other kind of work, simply because, you know, if we're in budget meetings or we're meeting with department heads or it's a CIP meeting or whatever it is, you know, you have to give up that day, and there's some indemnity, but we have 10 days indemnity, and actually we have more meetings than that. So all in all, I think that Donna McDonald's recommendation of $25,000 over 4 years is more reasonable than what is proposed in front of us today.
Thank you. Further discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
Well, just in terms of, I don't even consider this a proposed increase. This is just, this is status quo, because now the only difference is they're trying to offset the taxation. So I don't actually see an increase being brought forward in this proposal. A couple of other areas where I have some concern. I applaud that somebody's recognized that if we do want to attract other younger members of our community, that a child care benefit is, you know, beneficial for either sex. My concern is perhaps we should actually be calling that a dependency benefit, because what this does is this biases, this is ageism in its finest, child care benefit. Some of us, not including me, all of my parents have passed, but I do know people who are responsible for the care of either older adult children or their older parents, in terms of living with them in the house and have to have care, and may need to be hiring care if they are out of the home for a parent, say with dementia or whatever. So I would like to see that if we're gonna look at that, is that we call it dependency care. Obviously, there's a need to prove the need for any of it. I'm not against that. I don't think you can just say, I need that, and so be it. But I think that when we just talk about childcare, it's a bit of ageism. The other thing, again, the indemnity, the daily indemnity being increased from 125 to 175, I recognize that. One of the things that I, as a full-time employed person, one of the things I found is that 10 days really isn't sufficient. And what I'd actually prefer to see is perhaps maybe that even reduced a little bit back to say maybe 150 if that's a recommendation. But the days for
Waiting for others
counselors-
to join.
Uh-oh, did we lose Anna?
Waiting for us to join. The number of days for counselors be equivalent to the number of days for mayor.
What was
At
the
20,
number?
because it's only, you only get 10 days of indemnity. It just seems to me if I'm at a budget meeting, the mayor has to be there and we have to be there. Like 10 days, like, I realize that the mayor does have other obligations as well, but I think that the number of days could be increased. I support some of the things that past councillor Donna McDonald pointed out. The other thing is that I did read quite a bit of, it's been in the news quite a bit in terms of looking at almost like a severance package. I use that, tread lightly on that word, for councillors who complete their term of getting paid 10% of what they made in the 4-year period or 3-year period. That's paid at the end as a type of surplus. And the reason they came up with this 10% number comes from the fact that if you were a unionized employee, your pay, out of your pay package, that you pay that the employer pays, you pay 10, the employer pays about 10%. And so that idea of you don't have pensions, so if you're not working and you've given up your time, you've got nothing 4 years that you've taken yourself perhaps out of the employment market, that you would have a severance stipend at the end. And that's what I saw in about 10 communities pay around between 9.7 and 10.2%, because it's based on what the employer is paying as a pension contribution. So there are some other ways to look at improving compensation, but those are a few things that come to my mind. And I would have a recommendation that, in fact, as much as it's an uncomfortable topic, is that going forward, I think that indemnity, the policy needs to be reviewed, and indemnity needs to be reviewed yearly by the council of the day, given the budgetary constraints facing them, with that kind of goal of increasing the salary to a more livable wage.
Do we have anything on the floor?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Okay, I'd like to offer an amendment
All right.
that in the policy, indemnity for the mayor be changed from 49.5 to 59.5 effective January 1st, 2019. And that councillors' base salary from our base indemnification from 20 to 25,000. So a $10,000 increase to the mayors and a $20,000 increase, or a $5,000 increase for the councillors' indemnification. So I'm offering that amendment to this committee recommendation and policy.
Okay, so is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. So there's a seconder. We're gonna discuss that amendment. Now, there's a few things that I heard in, Ms. Long, if there's anything I missed, then,
So
we might have to-
can I just to refresh for a minute here, that when we make an amendment, the amendment is to the motion
I got
that's
it.
on the floor, and you're suggesting an amendment to the policy.
Okay.
okay,
So, so we're better off to vote on what is on the floor, so that you deal with whether if you
right.
defeat it, then you can just say to refer it back to staff,
All right.
rather than doing a defeat of it. But we can't, the amendment is to the motion, not to the document.
So can I move then referral of
Maybe
one?
just, can we not pass the resolution and change whatever section of the thing
We
to
can
something
say
different?
that it be adopted with the following amendments to the motion, to the policy. That is another way to
That's
do
a
it.
good
That's what I was trying to do, so.
Okay.
Okay,
So I would have a starting point, I would make approve it with the
With the-
change to
with
the
the
policy, the
following-
base rate.
All right, so I took some points down, and I think that I need to run through all of them. So Councillor Daly is proposing specific numbers, 59.5 for the mayor, and $25,000 per annum for councillors. So that's one amendment. So we're going to discuss all of these, and these are the other ones I heard. And if I am missing any, then please let me know. Change the childcare. I don't call it
Benefit.
benefit to dependent care. So that could apply if you have an aged parent or whatever. Increase the daily indemnity to 20 days for everybody, not just the mayor. So I want you to listen to all of this. So, and if any of council, we'll discuss this. There is another suggestion that if a council member completes their term, that we consider giving a 10% of total earnings towards pension, because we don't get pension. So that's another one that was suggested. And also that the policy be amended to include a yearly review, not just a once per term review, so that councils can look at budgets and ensure that things are working okay within a budget as well.
I think that's,
Yeah.
the policy does talk about an inflationary increase.
Right, but I mean, just, well, to review the entire policy to see if it's too much, too little, whatever was.
As doing that annually is
Too
a lot
much.
of work.
Too much.
Are you gonna have a committee? Who's gonna make this
Okay.
decision?
Okay. All right. So those are the things that I heard. Did I miss anything? And is there debate on any of these items?
So I've got my amendment on the floor.
Yeah. So I guess what we need to do
You need
is,
me to-
we need to deal with that amendment. So what we're wanting to do is refer the entire thing back to staff. So I think what we'd have to do if we want to do that is defeat your one amendment, or?
We can,
No,
we don't have to refer it back, we can deal with it right now and
Okay.
make the changes.
Okay,
It becomes, I mean, whether I'm talking about the current, what I'd like is the outcome for 2019 to be 59.5 and 25. And then we'll go forward with the policy the way it works from there. So,
So-
well, and if I could give my argument for that.
Before
Yeah.
you do that, that's a motion on the floor. It's not an amended motion, it's a motion on the floor.
It is, yeah.
It is, yes.
so,
The motion
You
is,
can amend the motion that Councilor
okay, so
Daly
I'm
made.
going to call for the question on the motion that's on the floor,
Well,
or the amendment.
it's not an
The
amendment,
amendment that's on the floor.
no, it's not
it's
an
a regular
amendment.
motion.
Okay, I'll call, okay, are you ready for the, so what,
Can I just,
Wait.
I would suggest if you wanna change provisions in that policy and add these additional ones, then I would do it all together. Some of those we have not looked at or researched at all,
we
so.
need to refer all of them back to staff, I think.
Yeah, if you're looking at that amount of change, then,
And so we should refer all of it back to staff.
although there is a resolution on the table and you can deal with that.
I would like to
That's
have the
where you wanna be.
discussion and.
All right,
And deal
proceed.
with this. I think those other things that the committees looked at, but what they didn't look at, that was an adjustment based on the change in the tax policy, which makes it level. And I think we've heard from everyone in the interviews, and I've heard every day, and see the workload of the mayor, and I think 59.5 is still a bargain for the city of Nelson, and from 20 to 25,000 again. I've seen councillors struggling with part-time jobs and trying to do this job and fit it in, and as well, the city manager talks about 2 weeks in October, 2 weeks in January, and I think it's even probably longer than that, where, you know, they are critical meetings for budget where you just can't be away, and council has to be here and participate in those things. So that's the, and I think that's very reasonable.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Sherbo.
I think we should pass the motion as is, and then we can amend or we can refer the rest of it back to staff to come forward with a recommendation at the next council meeting.
Counselor?
I don't understand how that's relevant to this here now. You'd have to make a motion to refer it. I think it's here before us, and I don't want to see it back every year or other than in the review process that we have that's being recommended. So I think we just deal with this and bring it up to where we think it ought to be. If you think it ought to be there, then vote on it.
All right, Council, are you ready for the question?
Which question exactly?
Question.
So we're gonna just deal with that the policy be amended with the salary changes.
Yes.
right? So we'll
So
just deal with
the
that. and then
59,
And the
Sorry?
25.
Yes,
yeah.
And then the rest of it would be referred back to staff.
if that's what you
Okay.
want
Okay,
to
so
do. then
that's what we're dealing with, okay. All right, so are you ready for the question on, with that, just the salary or the amount of the stipend? All right, are you ready for, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Now, would you like to entertain a motion to refer the rest of these,
I would.
all right, Councillor Morrison moves that we refer the rest of these back to staff for review.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Sherbo.
Just not to the committee, just to staff.
The staff, yeah,
Staff.
Can I ask a question of clarification?
yes.
There was something in this policy that referred to proving that you were losing salary, and I'm just wondering what that looks like. Because if you're self-employed, that's pretty difficult to do.
Yes, I agree.
If you're working contract work, who's going to say that? So I just have a little bit of concern with that wording.
So if we could pay attention to how we would vet that and ensure that there's
Yeah.
self-employed or whatever.
That, but
Okay. Any other points that you want to refer back to staff?
I think what it's referring to, you'd have to show that you, like if you had a contract for
contract.
$10,000.
Right, okay.
And because you had to work over here, your contract's now only $9,500, right?
Okay.
So you'd have to actually lose income from that contract to be able to get additional income.
Well,
I think that's what the intent is. Because otherwise you haven't had financial loss, you've worked some additional hours, which you're getting
Right,
sort of
okay.
paid for, right? But you haven't lost income, whereas someone that's has a job, they can't, and they have to take a leave for that actual day, they're not ever gonna get paid for that day, they can't make it up somewhere else, right?
Okay.
All the more reason to have more salary.
Yeah, it's challenging.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, all the more reason. I mean, when I'm away from work, I'm away from work and it's a leave of absence, right?
it's more difficult when you're self-employed.
Yeah.
It's,
Okay, so it's moved and seconded?
Yeah.
Thank you. Are you ready for the question on referring all these back to staff for review? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you,
And
Council.
I guess I just-
Just a note to staff, when we have those numbers, you'll just have to work from what the total remuneration is at 2019 and work back to what the current is and make an adjustment there, whatever that number be, to come, have that outcome.
The
At the end of
policy
the term.
itself actually has a value in it. It's just a
Yeah, it's a
report
dollar
that's
amount.
showing the comparison.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess I just need some clarification. Are you asking us just to rewrite the policy with this in there? Or are you asking us to do some research and say only, 10 out of, 100 municipalities have this allowance? Or are you just saying you want all those items in there?
I brought, sorry, I mean, there were my laundry list to look like, just that I had done some work at looking around at what other indemnity plans were for when we got to this discussion. And so there were examples of some. I think that, I'm not saying that all of these suddenly get built into the policy. It was just some options of looking at other things that are out there, what the cost might be. I don't see a significant cost to changing childcare benefit to dependent care benefit. And I think that those are just, this is the 21st century, and I think some of those changes just have to be made. And to look at those days again in terms of that indemnity particularly for when you're away, because there's all those days that you don't really know that you have. But I see even in your report when they interviewed you, CEO Cormac, that talking about trying to schedule everybody in for days, and I can tell you that you know, when you want suddenly 3 days of my week and I work full time in a 24-hour operation called the hospital, it's pretty hard for me to step out. And so I can only imagine that that applies to many other people that would like to have this seat at the table. So, yeah, I think that increasing those days, because that becomes significant wage loss over a period of time. And
So I think that's what I'm asking.
So it's just
Do
like-
you want us to look at and say, here's the days that, you know, a counselor must attend, and say that's,
So it could
no,
be,
but I think 20 days, I think it's just looking at, you know, what's, I think there's more than 20 days that you have to be. I mean, I know there's more than 10.
that's what I'm trying to clarify. Are you saying, go amend this policy, put 20 days in there, put all those things in there and bring
Well,
this
and then we'd
back?
have to look at what the cost is, yeah.
You know, that's what I'm looking, I'd be looking for the impact of the
I want the
changes.
impact.
So how much
you
got
just want
used,
the
how much
dollar
would
amount.
this, how much is this gonna cost to do it
Okay.
that way?
I want the cost, just so we can look at it.
and either amend or approve or have a couple
Yeah.
options. Is that clear?
Yeah, like I said, I didn't know if you wanted us to do research, say, are these common elsewhere, or are you just saying, no, put those in ours and just tell us the cost? So that's what I'm.
Cost.
Okay.
And I think the dependent childcare thing goes, it's
Yeah,
just a
that one's-
wash.
That's a wash, yeah. All right. I'd like to really thank the members of the committee that did work on the indemnity policy and that volunteered their time to do this work. It was useful to council, and the research that was done was very useful. So thank you to the committee, and let's proceed. We're now on to item 9A, and it's a zoning amendment regarding recreational cannabis.
Our favorite topic.
Yeah. It seems to be the theme of this particular council, huh? So we have a staff report here, so take it away, Natalie.
Did you want me, it was basically the same report that I gave at the public hearing today. I don't know if people would like me to go over that again.
Perhaps it would be really good, because we're on, the public hearing isn't televised, right? So I would be great if you could do that report again, because we're on camera, and it'd be good for people who are watching.
Yes, absolutely, of course.
Understand what we discussed.
Yep, absolutely. So the proposed regulations are a result of a thorough public engagement process that ensured that residents and businesses had a voice in the development of regulations. Just to go over some of the public engagement that we did, information sessions were held with council and media. Advertisements were in the paper for 5 weeks, 3 information booths, 5 open houses. We held 8 stakeholder meetings and mailed over 5,600 feedback forms to households and businesses. The response to the feedback form was overwhelming, with 32% of households and 27% of businesses sending back their form. The survey results are very clear. 75% of respondents thought that there should be a maximum number of cannabis retail stores. Overall, the results suggested a maximum of 5 cannabis stores. The feedback form specifically asked how many stores per area. We are proposing to translate the survey results directly into regulations by proposing a cap by area, which translate to 2 stores downtown, 1 store along Nelson Ave Highway 3A, 1 store in the industrial area Lakeside Drive, and 1 store in Railtown. To accommodate a maximum of 5 cannabis retail stores and provide flexibility in location options while still providing a buffer from sensitive facilities, staff is generally proposing 150 meters separation distance from schools, parks, and youth facilities. There are also some areas that have reduced separation distances, which includes Lakeside Drive, downtown west of Josephine Street, and the north side of Front Street, and 705 Nelson Ave. At the same time, we are proposing to remove medical cannabis zoning. The current rules were put in place until provincial and federal legislation was determined. The retail sale of medical cannabis is illegal and continues to be illegal, and will remain only available through online sales. The proposed zoning amendment bylaw will ensure that the City of Nelson is ready to accommodate cannabis retail stores once legalization takes effect, while managing the proximity of stores to places that children and youth frequent. Careful review of all the feedback gathered has been used to draft zoning bylaw amendments that reflect the community and meet federal and provincial goals.
Thank you, Natalie.
You're welcome.
So we are here to, there is a bylaw that we have had first reading on, first and second readings, and today we are looking at third and final adoption. So the first motion is that the zoning amendment recreational cannabis bylaw number 3406-2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconder, please. Councillor Daly, any discussion? Yes, Councillor
I
Daly.
had a question, the point that was raised at the public hearing today. The, someone who's a medical cannabis retailer, that the licensing will be revoked or end at a date that we picked. And they asked if they could stay in business as a consultant without retail sales. Is there any reason that there couldn't be a cannabis consultant business without retail sales?
I think we allow people to be consultants. I don't think we restrict what you're a consultant as, so I don't see that necessarily as an issue. If there's something more than that, you can issue a temporary use permit for something that doesn't meet our zoning. So I think we don't know, it's very vague on sort of what this looked like. And
Yeah, well, I did hear no sales, so to me that meant they
so
would be
if
maybe
he's,
a
if
new
he's a
business
consultant,
license.
he can, there's nothing illegal about being a consultant.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Go
That's
ahead,
not
Councillor.
considered a cannabis-related business?
I think if there's no cannabis on site, there's no processing or storing or any of those things, or selling or any of that, and he's just a consultant working with a computer, that would be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
there's
like
no
saying
issue.
a bookstore can't sell a book on cannabis.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead, Councillor Sherbill.
Yeah, so how do people that are currently getting medical marijuana, would they have to get it by mail then? Or-
Yeah,
Right, they're
that's.
supposed to get it.
I think the feds anticipate that the recreation will cover a number of people, and those that are want something, different than what recreation sells, then they would get it mail order. And that's not your decision as council. That's
No, I'm
the
aware of
federal
that. I
decision.
just wanted to know how,
Yep, that's
when the medical marijuana distribution centers end, then how do they continue
Yeah.
to get it?
Well, the feds will
grow
let
their
us
own.
know.
yeah. They can grow their
They
own.
grow their own, or they can get it in a brown
Well, they may
envelope.
get, there's 100 different varieties of marijuana, so
quite-
maybe
we are
they
quite
want a
knowledgeable
specific.
about
Two or two options. Yeah, so it's continuing as the mail order, and I assume there's still medical producers out there.
Thanks, Councillor. Any further discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And secondly, that the zoning amendment recreational cannabis bylaw number 3406-2018 be finally adopted. Mover, please.
Councillor Morrison did.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Second. Councillor Sherbill. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. We're on to cannabis procedures. I'm sorry, Council, I don't know what the heck. Sometimes my computer gets a little touchy. So this is to establish procedures to process cannabis retail applications referred to the city by the province. So there is, and this is adoption. We have discussed this before, and perhaps I could get Mr. Toom now with people watching to describe what's happening here.
All right, I'll keep it brief, and then we can move on to questions then. So what this procedures bylaw amendment deals with is how to we have a similar procedures schedule in this bylaw for liquor licensing, and this is an adaptation of that. It's a rather similar process, right? Applications go to the province and then come to the municipality for council's recommendation. The major difference again being here is just as passed by council is we have a limited number of licenses that we could recommend approval of in the city of Nelson. So what is added into this procedures schedule versus that of liquor licensing is this matrix system that allows staff to assign a score to each application that comes in based on these criteria that are listed out here, and then moving forward from there. So then ranking them in order based on the score that's given to each application, and considering any applications within 10% of each other to be equal of each other, so that there isn't a game where, well, one application received 2% more than another, but still in order to provide a thoughtful, hopefully useful recommendation to council on which applications should be recommended to the province. This would allow us to have a more transparent way of getting to that staff recommendation, while still understanding that there can be slight differences, and that a 2% difference between applications doesn't mean that they're substantially different from one another. The procedures amendment also includes, just like for liquor license applications, a public consultation component as well too, and then all of that comes together in the form of a report back to council, and council can still has the ultimate say, the final say on passing a resolution that will go to the province recommending certain applications and not others for a cannabis retail license.
Thanks, Mr. Toom. Any questions? Would someone like to?
I
Yes,
have
go
a
ahead. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Purcell, and then I'll get you, Councillor Daly.
Is it on the floor?
No, it's not on the floor.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe it's something to ask when it's on the floor.
No, this is final adoption, so we don't usually
No, it's,
Okay. All right, so could I have someone move the adoption? Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconder? Councillor Sherbo. Go ahead, Councillor Purcell.
Well, I guess, looking at the criteria, there are, I was wondering whether or not we could, where is it here, under the applicant has previous successful business experience and background, I would be interested in adding business experience in this area. So whether or not some of that is split off so that it's, I don't know, like 10% of that, 30% is actual experience in the cannabis field, I feel like it's the system that's rolling out right now is one that could easily overlook some of the people in our area who have a lot of experience in this field, and it would be a way to acknowledge any people's decades of working in that field. So that's one thing that I wouldn't mind talking to everybody about, or hearing what the rest of council has to say about that. And the other one that I think would be interesting to add is we've got, has a plan to create educational initiatives around impairment, health, safety, public consumption, whatnot. I wouldn't mind part of that including how you'll contribute to the community just in general. So if we have, local businesses who know and love our community, who want to pitch in whatever sector or whatever initiative that they're interested in, to have a plan to do that. So those are two things that I'd like to see added to the criteria.
We'd have to go back to, you'd have to rescind third reading and put this back.
For
You have to
those
what?
type of- correct.
You'd have to go back to, you'd have to rescind third reading and
Go back to
send this
second.
back to
Second
staff to
reading.
make additional changes at this stage. This had first three readings, and that's generally where
Where you make
where council
changes.
makes changes.
So thanks for that suggestion, Councillor.
If other people agree with them, then
Yeah.
I mean, we should have the policy we want. So
Yeah, that's just the procedure.
Procedurally, the way that it works is you would have to then defeat this and rescind third reading, and then we would have to go back and make those changes, and then it would come back for third reading and then a subsequent meeting for adoption.
So,
okay, I just wouldn't. I understand that. I just wouldn't want protocol to get in the way of us having the policy that we might want to have.
I don't think that would be the case. I just think that it would delay the process somewhat, and we may be depending on, this would probably push this into the next council.
Oh, we don't have a meeting until September. We would only be able to come back at third. And then there's a special meeting later in September where it could be adopted.
Possibly, okay, thank you. So are you proposing that we amend the policy or defeat the, no, have we've got a motion on the table. So
Council needs to
defeat
decide.
adoption and move back to
It's not on the table yet.
What's on the table is adoption of this motion.
Yeah.
Of this bylaw. And so if council wanted to follow the suggestion of Councillor Purcell, then you would have to defeat the motion
So-
on the floor.
So let's have discussion on Councillor Purcell's points.
Yeah, if there's no appetite to pursue it, we shouldn't pursue it. But if it's something that
Well,
sounds appealing
yeah.
to everyone else, I think we should talk about it.
So let's open the floor for discussion on those points that Councillor Purcell has raised. Is there a desire, Councillor Warmington?
Well, I like the first point that she made. I think that having previous cannabis-related experience makes more sense than business-related experience to me.
These are retailers though. The challenge with that is because it's been an underground economy, how do we quantify
That's
that
true.
you've been a grower in somewhere for 20 years?
The other thing that although I like the point, I think if I understood correctly, Councillor Purcell, you were saying that there would be consideration given to business owners who were really giving back to community. Was that what I understood you to say?
That was the second point.
That was the second point, yeah. I would have trouble with that. And the reason I have trouble with that is that this is a business, and we're legitimizing a business. This will be just like any other business in the community. That's how it's going to move into the future. And we don't ask that of anybody else applying for a business license, like if they're applying for a liquor license, for example. So in the interest, I think that the majority of our business owners in the community of Nelson give generously to the community in many ways. I just wouldn't like to have that mandated. You just don't know. I mean, I would assume that people would be generous because that's the nature of our community, but I would have trouble treating this business any differently than any other.
And I think it would be a little, it's almost asking someone to put some cash up front to,
Yeah.
for council to consider their application, which I think you might get a bit of hot water over that one.
So although I understand your sentiment, I would have trouble
And
with
on
that.
the related experience, ultimately, council can weigh that.
Yeah.
If you want to put
You don't
more
have to
weight on that or
stipulate.
not, we're going to look at experience. It'll say this is the type of experience. They've run a retail store for 20 years, or they've done this for 20 years, and so I think it's
you don't
ultimately
restrict
your discretion that we're not going to give any more points to it, but you're going to, you may look at that and say, I like this experience more than the other experience, and that's your discretion. I think the caution to council, though, is, once we adopt a matrix thing and staff objectively, as possible, scores those, certainly council ultimately makes that decision, but you're going to have to do it on some tangible criteria. You can't just say,
Yeah.
I like Joe Blow, and even though he scored 20%, I'm going to give him the license over someone that scored 100%. You would get ultimately sued in those situations.
Would staff get? Would council get the information, or would they just get the score? So would council know what kind of business experience they had, or would they just say they got 25 out of 30 on the business?
No, we can
score?
provide the full background, that the full application if we do that. Things like CIP grants and some other things. So we certainly can do that.
Yeah. Councillor Daly.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of sending this back to staff, and I voted against this and spoke against it when it came up for first and second reading, and my reasoning is fairly similar in that staff is scoring and based on things like business experience, and that was going to be included in the matrix and could mean that someone may not come before council because staff's made a subjective decision about their business experience. And my suggestion when it came before us last time and now is that it be a qualifying, so based on things that we can measure, location, security, fire prevention, ventilation, that if the proponent meets those requirements, then it comes forward as a bona fide applicant, and then we use a draw process from those qualified applicants, rather than looking at all this history of the person, their business success, or any other reason other than that they meet the qualifications to do this business. And we're going to have more than 5, I think, and we're going to have to make those decisions, and we can make it easy if staff says, yes, they meet the qualifications. And then we do a draw from that.
Thank you, Councillor. Any response from staff? No?
That was the same debate last time.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
Okay, so here we are at
11th hour.
11th hour, adoption of this process, and I realize that councillors and we all come with ideas that maybe should have been brought forward sooner. In the case of Councillor Daly, he brought his concept about not having this question about whether or not a person knows how to run a business. And so my comment is that we've now had 2 public meetings in regards to getting this to this position. And we have had a public meeting again tonight where one person spoke. About one person spoke only. Oh no, because Brenton came in, sorry. 2 people spoke about this plan. I heard neither one of them make any comment about either one of the first motion that we've just passed or about this. I have failed to see anybody come and say, this is an inappropriate matrix, this will not work. There wasn't a room full of people here like there was 2 years ago when we started the road down the Cannabis lane. So I have just moved this resolution, and it's been seconded, and I have no interest at this time putting this back to staff, having a decision being made at the next hour by a council who has not deliberated, listened to, heard all of the discussion over the last 3 years in regards to legitimizing cannabis sales in the city of Nelson, not get finalized by this council. I'm very concerned about that. I do believe that we need to finish what we started, and had this work that staff has put in the last year in trying to get us ready for legalization was not satisfactory to those people that are in the business, the room would have been full. I've seen 200 people in this room before. I don't see 200 people in this room today. There were not 200 people at the public meeting at 4 o'clock. So I do not want to refer this back, and I do want to see any amendments to this 3rd reading, to this final adoption.
Hi there.
Excuse me, this is a business meeting, and we don't usually have public comment at a business meeting. Were you hoping to attend the public hearing earlier?
I've been doing around the city. I've been cleaning up all the back alleys and cleaning up the recycling garbage. I'm Brian Lennon, Graver Rapper. I'm just here to improve the plan. If I could save the earth in one day, I will. Because there's one day I'm the best rapper ever, and I'll expose the mind. I'll tell you the whole plants and the earth, but I'm in the presence of the mayor. So you're the mayor, right?
I am. Could
I've been cleaning all your back alleys for you in one day. Last night I went to an isolation up at the hospital to get a good sleep. I've been up for 13 days of crystal meth, fentanyl, and drugs. I finally had a sleep. I came from trail. I almost died of fentanyl. I got evicted.
Can I ask that you make an appointment, if you would like to have a meeting with me? If you would like to have a meeting with the mayor, can I get you to make an appointment tomorrow? And what is your name?
Brad.
Brad.
Brian.
It's nice to meet you, Brad. And if you could, if you could make an appointment, I'd be happy to meet with you during office hours, but we're in a business meeting right now. And,
I'm cleaning up the back alleys for you guys.
Thanks for doing that.
that's
One
great.
day, Everything's awesome.
Thank you.
Cleared all our old property to clean it up.
Well, thank
God bless this whole plan. You know who beats Brad is.
thank you, Brad.
I'm on camera right now. He's
Brad.
Right, okay. Oh, so Brad, could I ask you to take a seat? We're in the middle of a meeting, and if you'd like to meet with me, if you could make an appointment at the front desk tomorrow, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Please have coffee.
Sure. All right, so council, we just heard from Councillor Morrison, and now we're moving to Councillor Sherbo.
So, I understand what Councillor Daly's saying, but I'm afraid I agree with Councillor Morrison. We have spent, and that's rare, sorry, but we have spent, I don't know how many hours on cannabis. We could have grown a whole crop ourselves in the time we spent on this. So I think we should pass the motion and get it done with.
All right. Is there, so the motion that's on the floor is for adoption of this regulation, thank you. And so I'm going to call the question. I don't think there's any more debate on this. And then we'll see where we end up. So, all in favor? 1, 2, 3.
What about upstairs?
Anna?
Anna is,
Yeah.
are you
I'm in favor.
for or against?
In favor.
Better life.
Sure.
She's in favor.
In favor? Okay. And opposed? 1? All right, so the motion carries. This has been this has been an amazingly arduous process. We've worked really hard on this with community and with each other. So thank you,
See
Council.
thank God we're not going through what they're going through in Ontario.
Well, let's. I didn't even. I wonder if we need to. Yeah, it's too bad. So we have a bylaw noted. This is a request for decision. This is for final adoption, and this is the storm drainage bylaw. Mr. Tooma, are you reporting on this too?
Not to Laneway Housing.
Okay, I was going to say I didn't think this was your department.
Storm man.
Yeah, that's right. So we had a revised storm drainage regulatory bylaw at the July 9th meeting, and we revised and rewrote regulatory bylaws. So this is coming for final adoption, and this is that the City of Nelson Bylaw Notice Enforcement Amendment Storm Sewer Bylaw number 3421 2018 be finally adopted.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Thank you, and seconded by Councillor Sherbo. Is there any further discussion on this? All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. We have, the next is fees and charges amendment, and that would be, this is for final adoption as well for water, sewer, and storm. And the motion is that the fees and charges amendment, water, sewer, storm bylaw number 3395 2018 be finally adopted. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo, second by Councillor Morrison. Discussion on this? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Storm sewer regulation, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm sorry, we should have had those the other way around, that this one was first, the other two are sort of subsequent to it.
Oh,
But it's the same result in there.
okay, this
So
is,
this is the regulatory bylaw now. We first did the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw relevant to the storm sewer regulations and the fees to storm sewer, and now it's storm sewer.
okay, so this is
Adoption as
for storm sewer regulatory bylaw, and this is for third reading and adoption.
This is adoption.
Oh, this is adoption, thank you. So this is that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Storm Drainage System Regulatory Bylaw number 3377 2018 be finally adopted.
Moved.
Councillor Morrison, Councillor Warmington seconds. Any further discussion? All in no, all in favor? Opposed? The motion carries.
Now,
So, official community plan and zoning by, this is for laneway housing. I bet this is when you're up, Mr. Toom.
Only if you want me to be.
This is third reading and adoption, and perhaps for the benefit of the folks at home, you might like to just briefly say what we've been doing with this.
All right. So this is will probably this is the final meeting that Laneway Housing is going to be coming to council following this project that's been going on since November. Final adoption of the final amendments pertaining to the height of laneway houses and the ability to use existing non-conforming buildings such as garages that are too close to the property lines as laneway houses, changing the use as long as the building envelope isn't changed, and by requiring a development permit for laneway houses that are over 5 meters tall. In the OCP amendment, there are specific design guidelines pertaining to sustainability, neighbor impact, design, etc. That we would go through, like for any other development permit process that we currently do in the downtown zone, for example, in order to obtain a minimal impact design from laneway houses that are taller than are currently permitted as of right in zoning.
Thank you. And we had a public hearing this afternoon. Late before the meeting, we had one comment from the public that was positive, and so we're ready to move forward. So first, that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Official Community Plan Amendment, Laneway House Design Guidelines, Bylaw number 3419-2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Warmington, seconded by Councillor Sherbo. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Secondly, that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Official Community Plan Amendment, Laneway House Design Guidelines, Bylaw number 3419-2018 be finally adopted. Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconder, Councillor Warmington. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Third, the Laneway House Height and Siting Bylaw number 3417-2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Seconded by Councillor Morrison. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And finally, that the Laneway House Height and Siting Bylaw number 3417-2018 be finally adopted. Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconded by Councillor Warmington. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Council. Next, this is to rezone Hall Street from 1 to C1A. So this is the applicant from Kulos Development is applying to rezone some property to proceed with development. So we have Ms. Miro here.
Just have 1 minute here to.
Sure. It's disconcerting seeing yourself on camera. Especially it's in living color, that's for sure. Thank you, Ms. Moreau. Would you like to tell everyone what's going on with this?
Okay, so this is for 205 Hall Street, and it's OCP amendment as well as a rezone. We also have Mike Kulos, the applicant for Kulos Development, in the audience, if we have any questions for him after this. Francis, am I doing something here?
Okay, so it's on the desktop there, your presentation, just double click it on the desktop. And I can't change the view of that when we've got somebody on the line, so it's a little bit different than normal.
Okay, no, that's great. Okay, so the property is at the intersection of Front Street and Hall Street. So the applicant is Kulos Development, and he is proposing a 4-story mixed-use residential commercial building that includes 38 units. 6 of those are 2-story townhouses. There are 22 2-bedrooms and 10 1-bedrooms. It also includes 4 commercial units at grade that start at the corner of the intersection and work up Hall Street. The applicant is proposing mid-level priced housing, and this is market housing. This building will be a step code 3, which is roughly 20% more energy efficient than conventional development. And the value of the project is roughly around $10 million. So this is the north elevation. So this is the elevation that faces Front Street. And there you can see the 2-story townhouses there at grade. And then you have the commercial starting at the corner and working its way up Hall Street. Again, you have the north elevation on the top, and the back of the building is the bottom. You have the west elevation on the top there. That's the elevation that faces Hall Street, and that's the entrance off of Hall Street into the development. And at the bottom, you have the east elevation that faces the pool. Again, just some more examples of, this is the north elevation, so these are the 6 townhouses. Again, on the right, you have a little bit more detail of what each of those townhouses will look like. Bottom left is the access off of Hall Street, and bottom right is the parking lot in the back that is adjacent to the parking lot for the NDCC. As I said, this is an OCP amendment, so it's going from institutional to mixed-use core. It's also a rezone, so it's going from institutional to C1A, which is the same as C1, except for there are 2 changes to that. So one is a decrease in the rear setback from 1.5 meters to 0 meters, as well as a decrease in the setback that faces the pool from 3 meters to 1.8 meters. Again, that just shows you the zoning. So currently it's green, which is institutional, and the proposal is to turn it to yellow, the C1. So in terms of that rear setback, because the building is sited to the northwest of the site, right adjacent to Front and Hall Street, and all the parking is in the rear, you actually have between 8 and 12 meters before you hit the back property line, which then is adjacent to the rear lane for NDCC as well as the parking lot for NDCC. So from a planning perspective, we don't see that as too much of an impact. In terms of the interior side setback, the applicant is proposing to go from 3 meters down to 1.8 meters. And if you look at the regulations, we're looking at 3 meters on both sides, so a total of 6 meters. The pool actually has a generous setback at 4 meters, and so if you add that to the 1.8 of this proposed development, you actually come up to 5.8, which is really 0.2 meters less than what is actually required. So council has approved this land sale, so it's come to you before, and these were the following conditions of that land sale. So that the applicant would bring forward an OCP amendment as well as a rezone of the site, that they would provide for mixed-use development with commercial at grade and residential above, and a minimum of 30 units. And that there would be tax exemptions allowed for no more than 25% of the residential units. And that's both tax exemptions as well as a supportive designation with the province. And that the development would occur within 5 years. The development aligns with both the OCP as well as with the Sustainable Waterfront and Downtown Master Plan in terms of it provides diversity in housing options, its development of vacant downtown land with mixed use, commercial multifamily development, and it provides for a strong commercial street front. The applicant held an open house at the Hume Hotel on June 14th. It was advertised in the newspaper, and one business owner showed up and was in support of the development. As well, the development went to the APC on July 18th. They did not attain quorum, but there was support there from the members. And that is the presentation. I did not have, at the time that this went through, I did not have the traffic impact assessment, but I do now, and I will hand that out.
Thank you.
So if you want to just flip to the last, so this is kind of an executive summary, the front part of the report. I didn't provide for you all the statistical analysis at the back, but if you want to flip to the last page, it takes you to the findings and recommendations. So the traffic engineer estimated that the proposed development will have 17 trips in the AM peak hour as well as 31 trips in the PM peak hour, and that given this anticipated traffic, they don't anticipate any impact in terms of the acceptable level of the service of this intersection.
Thank you, Ms. Moreau. I think council's just looking through all these points. So, council, Mr. Koulis, would you like to join Ms. Moreau at the table? And thank you for being here this evening. Much appreciated.
You're Worship, councillors.
Thank you. All right, council, let's begin with learning more. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the report. My only concern is that our traffic seems to be, like I said, acceptable levels for 2018, but our traffic seems to be increasing considerably every year. So I just hope that it doesn't add a problem in the future. Is there or will there be road access to the back of the aquatic center at the same level there is now, at the bottom?
No, we are, the parking lot for the condominium is about 3 meters lower than the parking lot at the aquatic center.
I just have a concern there in case they need to do any maintenance, because they have done a lot of work through those back doors. So my concern is if they needed to access that.
Talking about the aquatic center.
Yeah, that was addressed. We have met with the regional district and both the highways and the regional district in our new landscape plan reflects an emergency strip between the buildings that will act as a walkway as well as an emergency access for ambulances and fire trucks into that lower area there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, council? Go ahead, Councillor Daly.
The two changes then from, with the setback, I got the back one onto the, and what about onto the front on the street? How far back are we from the sidewalk this building then? You know?
On Front Street?
Yeah,
About a meter.
front street setback from the sidewalk would be 0?
No, it's a meter because Hydro needs a meter along Front
Okay, 1 meter back, okay.
And I think that fits with the planning. That's the goal of that development. We want to see like Baker Street, that you're right on the sidewalk, not set back from.
Right. So a portion of the parking, it will be for commercial parking, is that why we've got an excess?
Right, so there's one level of underground parking for residential, and then the commercial parking would be at grade in the building.
Okay.
Any other questions, council, or discussion? Questions for Mr. Koulos?
And we're just sure that that none of this impacts emergency egress from NDCC.
No, so we've made sure that there's an emergency access, so you would access it right off of Front Street, and you'll be able to drive with emergency vehicles right in between the two buildings.
Okay.
All right, any further questions?
Just to confirm, we're gonna see a development permit request?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the townhouses, are they 3-bedroom then, or?
There is going to be 1 3-bedroom on the end, possibly. It's just in design stages now, but otherwise they're scheduled to be all 2 bedrooms.
Okay.
But we're just redesigning the far end one as possibly a 3rd bedroom.
Thanks.
All right, council. We have some recommendations here from staff. First, that the official community plan amendment bylaw number 3426/2018 be given a first and second reading. Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Seconder, please. Councillor Sherbo, is there a discussion on this or any? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second, that zoning amendment bylaw number 3427/2018 be given a first and second reading. Didn't I just do that?
No, you did the
This is zoning.
OCP. This is now zoning.
Thank you. And that council directs staff to schedule a public
We do
hearing.
need those separate.
Oh, okay. So first and second reading for the zoning amendment bylaw. Thank you, Councillor Daly. Seconder, please. Councillor Sherbo, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And third, that council directs staff to schedule a public hearing.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Sherbo, seconded by Councillor Daly. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, council. And are there any other questions from staff or any further information?
Just curious about, you got a 5-year window for it being done, the development being done. And what happens if we're not done, still vacant?
That's on covenant, so the city has the right to reacquire that property at the price we sold it at.
Got it, thanks.
That's in your package.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us this evening, and good luck. We
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
we
See you at
think
the public hearing.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you for being here. We have first three readings for building bylaw amendment, and this is to provide more consistency in enforcement, safety, and fee collection. And the staff is proposing that a building permit for any retaining structures over 1.2 meters in height be required, and that the Marshall and Swift construction value estimation system be used to calculate the value of construction and building permit fee. So, we have a recommendation that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Building Bylaw Amendment Retaining Walls and Permit Calculation Bylaw number 3428/2018 be introduced and read a first and second time by title only.
Move.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconder, please. Councillor Sherbo, is there discussion?
Is this in regards to a building over that height or a
Well,
wall?
we have somebody here that's going to tell us.
Or
Before we
even,
go
Want to
there,
introduce?
So I'm gonna,
I think I've introduced
I
Sam
don't think
before.
we've
I was
met
just
this.
thinking about
Who
that.
is this? That's two new people that have come up here today.
Well, I'm very happy to introduce Sam Ellison, who is our new building inspector. Sam comes to us from the Regional District. He's got over 10 years of experience in building inspection, and he's been great so far in the first 4 weeks?
almost a month.
Very good. Yes.
All right, so we have so go ahead, Sam.
Okay, so, the first point here to do with the retaining structures, and I just touch on this briefly. So, I mean, the Nelson is a city of slopes, as we've all seen. There's lots of retaining walls and things around town. Some of them are old and not in very good condition, and a lot of construction that's going on right now requires new ones to happen. It's pretty typical in most jurisdictions to have this in requirement for building permits for these retaining structures, and it's just a way for us to regulate how it happens. There has been a requirement in the city of Nelson in the past to get engineering, but we had no mechanism to regulate how they happen, how tall they were, where they were going to be, what they were going to be made of. And in most other jurisdictions, you see that, including the regional district and most other places. So this is just sort of an attempt to bring our building bylaw in line with other building bylaws. Did anybody want any questions on that part of it?
Go ahead, Councillor Sherbo.
yeah, this just pertains though to between city property and private property.
No.
No, it would pertain between properties?
Any person or people wanting to build a retaining structure that retains more than 1.2 meters of fill would have to get a building permit, and it would be regulated.
So even
It's for
between-
safety reasons mostly.
Yeah, even between properties.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome, by the way.
I think it's a good
Oh,
idea.
okay.
Any other questions?
Did you want me to speak to the other point in this change too?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so we currently have a system right now in this building bylaw where we ask people to declare a projected construction cost when they apply for building permits. And the department has used the Marshall and Swift estimating software. It's a national, they use it all over North America to do this. We've used it in the past to help check if the declarations we're getting are correct, but it's never been in the bylaw, so we haven't been able to default to it. In the case where we say we got an amount, it was very low, we ran it through, the amount was much higher through here. This actually allows us to use that value to get a permit fee. So it's also something that's quite common in other bylaws.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. So we have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion or any questions? All ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Secondly, that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Building Bylaw Amendment, Retaining Walls and Permit Calculation Bylaw number 3428, 2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Seconded by Councillor Morrison. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here this evening. Look forward to seeing more of you.
Yes, welcome.
You will.
That's good. We like people showing up. And our next bylaw is regarding short-term rental regulations, and we have the first three readings regarding our short-term rental regulation bylaw, and we've had yes?
I could be excused due to my perceived conflict of interest.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison, for that. You may be excused. We've had short-term rental bylaw in place for a year. We actually said we would test drive it and then come back with some, see how it worked and see if there needed to be any changes. So in the meantime, we'll hear from Mr. Toom again regarding this, what's happening with that.
All right. So I spoke to you last about short-term rentals at the June Committee of the Whole meeting, where I presented the results of the surveys that we did both for the public and for short-term rental license holders. A lot of what is contained in this RFD amending bylaws is exactly as presented at that time of that presentation. So what I'd like to do is just hone in on three of the items on this list, if you're looking at the front page of the RFD, and then also touch on these additional housekeeping items that have been included in the zoning amending bylaw. Number three, item number three, removing the Nelson Cooney Lake Tourism membership. I had warned you that this might be coming at the June COW meeting, and sure enough, since that meeting, there has been an announcement by the province as effective October 1st. Short-term rentals are going to be required to remit the MRDT, so the 2% tourism tax, as well as PST. This Nelson Cooney Lake Tourism membership requirement was placed specifically in lieu of the tourism tax that was going to Nelson Cooney Lake Tourism, that was being remitted by hotels and larger bed and breakfasts. So there isn't a need for this anymore. And I've been in this close conversation with Diana Dukes from Nelson Cooney Lake Tourism about this as well too, and we're on board with that together, removing that requirement. Item number 4. This was the complicated discussion that we had around secondary suites last time. And what I want to be clear with is that there isn't as based on the conversation we had with you at the Committee of the Whole meeting, there isn't a reduction in the fees for utilities or business license fees, for that matter, for secondary suites being used as short-term rental. What is being proposed in the amending bylaws, in fact, they're not even really entirely in this RFD, what we're about to vote on, but rather in fees and charges RFD that Francis will present right away, is that there's going to be a utility fee that's levied at the time of application that makes up the difference of the 75% water and sewer discount. What this means is no impact in revenue, no impact in that sense at all, but rather more efficiency in terms of administrating the water and sewer discount and ensuring consistency with the issuance of those water and sewer utility bills. What happens, right, is short-term rentals aren't the same, don't operate in the same way, for at least for a lot of people, as regular businesses where people sort of set up, they're planning on being there until the end of their career. There's a lot of people there are people who are coming and going. They'll have a short-term rental license 1 year, then they renew quite late, later in the next year. And that's made for a very complicated situation for finance downstairs to be administering that, to be taking away that discount, putting it back, reissuing the water and sewer bills. So this way it's tied more to the business license application itself. Yes. effectively reversing the discount. So in terms of their water and sewer bill, they will have the 75% discount because it is a conforming secondary suite. But if they come in and apply for a short-term rental license in that secondary suite, the difference will be made up at that time. Next, the final item I'd like to discuss on here is item number 7, that a guest home may not be advertised for more than 182 days per year. This has been, in terms of, I've received comment from a couple of the short-term rental operators back specifically on this one, and why this is being proposed. Again, specifically for guest home, again, the purpose of this is to have a more sort of clarity around the principal residency requirement. So there have been a couple complaints, and I believe that council's received emails about those as well too in the last year about people who, despite having provided that proof of principal residence, that there have been complaints by members of the community that actually that person doesn't live there at all, and that the property is being Airbnb'd on a full-time basis. Which, if you're actually meeting the principal residency requirement, shouldn't be the case. The principal residency requirement through the homeowner grant, for example, if you're signing off on declaring that for a property, insinuates that you're there the majority of the time. That is the regular place where you're conducting your daily affairs. So 182 days, half of the year, then is saying you can pick any time of those, throughout the year and advertise during those days. But really, if you're advertising that the home is available for rent for more than half of the year, then there might be a conflict or a contradiction then with the fact that it's your principal residence. And again, that applies only to the guest home licenses. So that is the 3 items I wanted to present on the short-term rental specific amendments. Moving on then to the second page here, there were 4 non-STR related amendments that are being included in here. The first 2 pertain specifically to secondary suites and the definitional situation around them, adding in, for example, that indeed secondary suites can be now permitted in a duplex, so that just adds clarity there, and also clarity around whether the building code treats a secondary suite as a secondary suite or as a suite. So it's really a housekeeping amendment in that sense, that falls back on the building code and whether it treats a suite in a duplex as a secondary suite or as a suite. Thirdly, same on the theme that Sam presented on retaining walls, is to formalize that retaining walls up to 1.2 meters in height be exempt from the minimum setback requirements. Retaining walls are often necessary in the city of Nelson, and given the slopes, as of if the building bylaw amendment does indeed pass, go through final adoption, then we'd be requiring building permits for retaining walls over 1.2 meters in height. That 1.2 is really the threshold that a lot of municipalities, particularly in BC, use for whether a building permit is required or not, or whether they are subject to the minimum setback requirements. Finally, we would recommend then an amendment of the definition of lot coverage to specify that decks, stairs, and porches only count against the lot coverage maximum if they are over 0.6 meters in height. Why 0.6? That's 2 feet. That is what is currently in the lot coverage definition for all kinds of other structures, whether detached decks, for example, or etc. Anything that's over 2 feet tall counts against lot coverage. And as it currently stands, sort of decks and porches and stairs are defined a little bit differently. So this will provide more consistency in that regard, that we can quite clearly say anything over 2 feet tall counts against lot coverage. Finally, I should mention as well too, there is a recommended resolution in here that the zoning amendment bylaw not proceed to a public hearing. Their reasons for this are explained, are given under the legislative impact section on page 2. Given that the majority of them are clarifying language changes and that they are not in contradiction with the official community plan.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Toom? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Daly.
That's a lot to cover. So the one is claiming the discount on the water sewer, and then it's an annual renewal of the licenses when that difference would be picked up there.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So the fee would be paid at the same
It's
time
not
as the
a one-time,
application.
It's annually. So the other question I had, the 180 days for a requirement for a full house rental, I'm just not sure if that protects our long-term rental units, because someone could have a house and maybe make enough in the 180 days to leave it more than they would if they were renting it long-term. And it might impact our long-term rental stock. I'm wondering what your thoughts about, what are your thoughts about that? That if someone had a house and rented it for 180 days and left it vacant, they may be ahead of what they might collect if they were long-term rentals, and how are we going to stop that?
So again, the status quo is that there isn't that restriction at all. So if you obtain a license successfully and have met the principal residency requirement, you've claimed the homeowner grant. We're not looking at it any closer for that. And that's exactly sort of where this proposed amendment is coming from, is that we don't have anything right now. In terms of, yes, so theoretically, in 50% of the calendar days of the year, there could be a lot of money being made. However, this is specific to advertising, saying this is when the home is available for rental. Not saying necessarily that that's going to be occupied, 100% of, and it's quite unlikely that to be occupied 100% of the days that someone says that yes, this property is available for short-term rental. So it's, if you're assuming 100% occupancy, but I don't have the feeling that's what a lot of people are getting out on the ground.
Well, you do have direction to not reduce the number of long-term rentals by having regulations that don't impact that.
Well, I think we're trying to find that balance, recognizing there are going to be short-term rentals in our community, and like I said, recognizing that, but on the other hand, not creating the situation as in other communities where people are just buying these houses and turn them into sort of mini hotels.
So just to follow this stream, then, we do have a limited number of licenses we're going to
Still have the
allow,
cap.
per block. And do you know what
That's
the
not
number
changing.
offhand is?
It's 110 annual licenses.
Full guest houses?
There isn't a cap specific to full guest houses.
That could be all of those could be that.
Correct. Yeah. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head right now, but in terms, it's actually the minority of them are entire guest home licenses. Okay. The majority are guest suites and individual rooms.
And Councillor Warmington.
Well, Councillor Daly actually asked my question. My concern again is with how do we ensure that we're not losing long-term rental stock in full houses? And so you're saying that 182 days advertised as available. That is the maximum.
And on top of the principal residency requirement, right? So the applicant is still coming in, and they're, the majority of cases, unless they just bought the house, they're coming in and providing the proof of homeowner grant. Well, we have that in our own system actually, that they've claimed the homeowner grant. You're only claiming that on one property in British Columbia, and you can only in British Columbia, and in so doing, you're also signing off that this is your principal residence to the provincial government. That's where you live your daily life. So we wanted to, as well, to provide some flexibility nonetheless, for, retirees, for example, people who have, more transient lifestyles as property owners, and also acknowledging that 100% occupancy during those 182 days is unlikely.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's, I'm really glad that you took the public survey too, because the stats there are quite interesting. In the public survey, 28% were satisfied, 9% were neutral, and over 40% that thought the regulations should be even more restrictive. So I think that we've worked hard with the short-term rental community, the people wanting to do this, and I think that we've tried to achieve some balance and some protection over longer-term housing and rental housing for sure. Council, I am going to move on to our motions if there's no further question for Mr. Toom. First, that the Corporation of the City of Ellison Business License Amendment Short-Term Rental Bylaw number 3416/2018 be introduced and read a first and second time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Warmington, seconded by Councillor Sherbo. And I have one question. There's the elimination of two fees. One was the inspection fee of $30 and the other was the deposit. Why are we doing that?
Well, it's actually part of the next RFD, the Fees and Charges Amendment. So you're not actually voting on that right now.
Thanks. It was just mentioned in this report.
Sure.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second, that the Corporation of the City of Ellison Business License Amendment Short-Term Rental Bylaw number 3416/2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Warmington, seconded by Councillor Sherbo. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Third, that the zoning amendment short-term rental bylaw number 3418/2018 be introduced and read a first and second time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Seconder. Councillor Warmington. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Fourth, that in accordance with Section 4642 of the Local Government Act, Council not hold a public hearing for the zoning amendment bylaw in consideration of its consistency with the official community plan. Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo, seconded. Any discussion on that? Any concern? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And fifth, that the short-term rental update bylaw number 3418/2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Warmington, and it's the Councillor Warmington and Sherbo show. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, moving along.
Councillor Morrison back in?
Yes,
No, these are still dealing with.
Yeah, oh man, we've got a few to go through here. Hopefully she doesn't fall asleep out there. So go ahead, Mr. Toom. This is the fees and charges amendment for the short-term rentals.
So I'll let Francis. I can quickly touch on the short-term rental aspect of it. Again, so the $30 annual inspection fee. Mostly for clarity's sake, in terms of actual on-the-ground implementation of the bylaw, it's much more straightforward to just have one business license fee. So the intent of that originally was to take our extraordinary inspection fee, spread it over 3 years, because the inspection recurs every 3 years. It was a lot more cleaner, essentially, to keep a flat business license fee with everything bundled into it. So the $30 is eliminated, but taken into account that a lot of the enforcement work occurred last year in terms of that initial enforcement. That it does make sense, and that there isn't going to be revenue loss for the city by removing the $30 inspection fee. The deposit is proposed to be removed because there hasn't been a need for it whatsoever. It was something that was recommended to us by a couple other, two specifically municipalities in British Columbia, who had $1,000 deposits on their short-term rental. Business licenses, and there's been zero need to levy any fines, bylaw tickets on licensed short-term rentals. All of the fines that have been issued have been for those who haven't yet paid the deposit. So that is why it's being proposed. It's been the number one item of complaint as well too from short-term rental applicants, and we simply haven't had a need for it to actually make use of it. Otherwise, there's no proposed change to the business license fees for short-term rentals.
Thank you.
And the two other there are three other schedules that are in the fees and charges in this amending bylaw. So water and sewer fees have now added that charge to make up the difference if you have a secondary suite, short-term rental, that you got the discount because you have a conforming secondary suite in your house, but now you have a short-term rental, so now it's a fee to make the difference between the two on both water and sewer. And then we added a new fee on the development services schedule, and that's indicating that when we do primarily road closures is the example I can think of, is that we need to set a value for what the sale of that property is. And the BC Assessment Authority used to help us with setting some costs. They're not anymore. So we have to go to the market and get a market appraisal, and the actual cost of that we want to pass along to the applicant. So it's the actual cost of what the appraisal is.
Thank you. All right, thanks for that explanation. So we have a couple of recommendations that the fees and charges amendment STR Development Services Bylaw number 3420-2018 be introduced and read a first time and second time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Seconder, please. Councillor Daly. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second, that the fees and charges amendment number 3420-2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Daly, seconded by Councillor Sherbo. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have one more item on the short-term rentals, and that is bylaw enforcement amendment. So, and this is first three readings. So, any explanation on that or any synopsis?
To get it up here and look at it. So I think as far as the short-term rentals goes, there are no new penalties in there. It's just that there's a I'm looking at the right one. Yeah, because there's a section was taken out. There's a renumbering, so it's a purely a housekeeping matter.
Thank you.
Different on that. Building bylaw, we added some penalties, and Alex can speak about that. And the subdivision.
Yes, if you just we scroll out to the table there with those penalties. So the in terms of the building bylaw specifically, we interestingly have not had a penalty already for failure to obtain a building permit or for failure to comply with building permit conditions. So in those cases, there's there's been other mechanisms. For example, a notice on title can ultimately be carried through, but having a ticket that can ultimately be enforced on a daily basis in a really bad case is much more efficient and practical. In terms of the subdivision bylaw, the two proposed ticket fees added in there are also pertaining to retaining walls. Retaining walls have been a big theme of the summer, and to make it much easier for staff as well to intervene in cases where engineering hasn't been provided for retaining walls, and there's an actual there's a threat to public safety.
Thank you. So we have, again, a couple of recommendations, and it's that the bylaw and notice enforcement amendment be number 3424, 2018 be introduced and read a first time and read a second time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Seconder, please. Councillor Daly. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second, that the bylaw enforcement amendment bylaw number 3424, 2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Second by Councillor Sherbo. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Now we can get Councillor.
Waiting for others to join.
Now we can have Councillor Morrison come back.
Who the heck's out there?
She's done.
Oh, thanks. She's right here. She's presto changeo. There she is. Thanks, Councillor Morrison.
Councillor Purcell has left the meeting.
And Councillor Purcell has left the meeting. Thank you. So we have another off-street parking and landscape amendments. And this is always, parking is one of our favorite topics, isn't it, Mr.
Yeah,
King?
along with cannabis and short-term rentals and, yeah.
Go for it.
All right. So where this is coming from, there's a short little list there under the legislative impact section. A number of city documents call for the reconsideration of, or the consideration of parking requirement reductions from the draft affordable housing report from this year, the official community plan, and really the benefit of actually looking at doing bylaw amendments when we have sort of planning directions, planning documents like that, and there's concrete evidence of sort of justifying those parking requirement reductions, is that it provides more certainty to people who are interested in pursuing development of things like senior citizens' homes in this case, or care services. Sometimes on our end, as city staff or council, a variance doesn't look like it's necessarily as big of a deal, but it is interesting sort of on the front line talking to people who are very, very cautious about, they're not interested in purchasing a property to do such and such a project, right, because of the uncertainty around pursuing a variance. So hence where these are coming from the fact that we have those planning documents and that making these amendments could provide more certainty in these cases to property owners and developers than pursuing variances in each case. So I'm going to go through, there's 4 amended and proposed parking requirements. They're right on the table or on the front page of the RFD. I'm going to go through them one by one. So senior citizens' homes. This is a new use that's defined as either subsidized, so low income, or assisted housing for senior citizens. We borrowed the definition from the city of Castlegar. They've had this for a while already. And that's what it is to amend, and why it's sort of in brackets and italics in this table is to add a nuanced level to that multi-unit residential parking requirement. All right, so right now that parking requirement that applies to rental, condos, senior citizen housing, when there's, in the literature and in parking research, there's a demonstrated wide range of parking demand for all these different types of multi-unit residential use. So the 0.4 spaces per unit, that comes from best practices around British Columbia. So we're looking specifically in the Coonies. Creston has actually something lower than that at 0.33 stalls. Trail is the same thing. Castlegar is slightly higher for seniors housing. And also looking at the precedent of Council's recent decision for the Nelson Cares development on Nelson Avenue, where the parking requirement was reduced to 0.4 stalls per unit. Secondly, so both the care services and transition house are both very similar uses. In terms, so care services include, group homes, nursing homes. Transition homes are defined as temporary accommodation for victims of family violence. Currently, they both have the same parking requirement of 1 space per 30 square meters of gross floor area. And when you do that calculation, so both of these, particularly a transition house, actually a transition house is defined as being in a single detached dwelling. At 2,000 square feet, that's a requirement of 7 parking spaces, and a transition house is a permitted use in and as well as care services in our residential areas. So if you can imagine a 2,000 square foot home that has a few people living at 7 parking required stalls is quite high. The square meter, the gross floor area, that encompasses everything, right, from the bathrooms to the hallways. So for care services, then it's proposed to be 1 space per 4 living units within that care service, which nursing homes, group homes, as I said, which falls in line with what's found in British Columbia. There was also in 2015 for Nelson Landing an approved, here in City of Nelson, an approved parking reduction for care services to this rate of 1 per 4 living units. Transition house, then 3 parking spaces. Our requirement for a single detached home is 2 spaces, and given the definition of a transition house of up to 8 people in it, people who are there on a temporary basis, fleeing family violence, the need for 7 stalls for a 2,000 square foot home didn't quite seem appropriate, so just a little bit higher than from a single family home. Finally, an amended definition for under this long list of public assembly, art galleries, museums, of making the precision that it's one space per 10 square meters of floor area used for assembly purposes. Right now, our bylaw simply states gross floor area. That encompasses the hallways, that encompasses the bathrooms, storage, etc. This language of assembly purposes is borrowed from the city of Vancouver, and is meant to understand, take into account that office space and cleaning storage facilities in an art gallery, for example, a room full of stacked chairs doesn't have induced parking demand with it. Even with this proposed parking amendment, which even though the numbers aren't changing, is a lower parking requirement. Touchstones, for example, if touchstones were to be built anew, it would require 44 parking stalls for that much square footage for an art gallery museum based on this. So this is already a reduction, and in terms of that, it would be even more because touchstones also includes hallways and bathrooms, etc. But it is actually still a rather high parking requirement for a museum or indoor public assembly also includes churches, for example. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. Any questions on that? Yes,
So
Councillor Daly.
presumably this parking is for guests or people who work there, or the people who live there.
And in actually the case of all four uses, yes. Yeah.
It's just interesting that that you're using different matrix or whatever you want to call it for. Because some makes more sense than others. One space for, like the transition house, that's plenty. Because it's only eight.
It's a single
I'm just
detached
thinking
home.
about staff at these places. How much staff do you have? And the other question is, the question I have is, a living unit could be one person, or I didn't actually see if the living unit is one.
Yes. So it's
room with 4
intentionally.
people?
So a living unit in a nursing home or assisted living, it's the common term that's used in these parking bylaws for this use. It would be generally defined as one room. So generally you're only going to have one person in a nursing home
Living
room
unit.
per
Oh, yeah,
living unit.
okay.
Exactly.
And seniors, of course, the spaces or units would be one, or it could be a couple, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the same term as we currently have for multi-unit residential.
Just trying to figure out if that's enough for the people working there and visiting and not be parked on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some recommendations that the off-street parking and landscape amendment, commercial parking update bylaw number 3422/2018 be introduced and read a first and second time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconder, please. Councillor Sherbo. All in favor? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm also looking at, I'm looking at Creston and Trail with the .33 stalls, but they have probably more flat parking area, and you're going to .4 from the .75, and with the seniors home, I'm just not sure that we always have parking around beyond that. Wouldn't it be better off having a higher requirement and then having them ask for a variance? Then we can actually look at the neighborhood and see where someone could park.
So again, we're taking direction from a number from the OCP to specifically it was the affordable housing report that calls for the review of parking regulations for seniors housing and special needs housing. And the definition of senior citizens home includes either assisted living in cases where it's less and less likely that they're going to be in possession of their own vehicle, as well as low income, so specifically subsidized senior housing. And that's embedded right into the definition, and not only specific to senior citizens housing, but in general across the multi-unit housing spectrum, low income developments have less of a parking demand even in a smaller community.
I see that it's defined as subsidized or low income, so we're not talking about assisted living that's $4,000 a month or something.
I think that falls in the same category.
Yeah, it's one or the other.
Oh, it could fall into that too.
Yeah.
And I think there's an example in the RFD with the development on Nelson Avenue, and we required 0.46 stalls, and the demand there is actually only 0.07. So there's, that's the balance you're trying to find is, as council knows, building parking in Nelson is extremely expensive, and either that development's not going to happen, or those residents are going to be paying more for an empty parkade.
And that's assisted living?
That one is
Supported living, whatever,
supported living, I guess. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we need a bit of clarification, because senior citizen home could be an independent living place as well, where people do still drive.
Correct, but then it would be specifically subsidized, right? So the definition that we're calling for senior citizens home does not include independent living for non-subsidized
Right.
housing.
Okay.
Yes,
That's a totally
another way to
different kettle
flip it
of
around.
fish.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you draw the conclusion they wouldn't afford a car.
Right.
Okay. So, are we ready for the question on that? Ready to go? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second, that the off-street parking and landscape amendment, commercial parking. Yeah, you're going to move by third reading. Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Warmington. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Hang in there with me, Council. We're on the home stretch.
Just as a little topic on this parking thing. I mean, parking, it's one thing to have, you could have a big car parking, and 2 big cars could be 3 little cars. I don't know if it goes to that, where you have smaller parking spots for more cars,
We do have provisions for like larger parking lots in the bylaw for like in a multi-unit building, for example, that some of the parking requirements can be met by smaller car parking.
I just think rather than parking spot, it probably ought to be square footage that's required that they could then modify to, for, yeah, anyway. Just a thought.
Thanks for your thinking on it. Was that sounded like a lullaby? Somebody got to go to bed?
Time for bed. Go to bed by 9:30 p.m. to get a full 8 hours sleep.
Good luck, Counselor.
Hang in there with me.
Sorry,
We're
it's
almost done. We've done really well. We've had a big agenda and we've done pretty well. Our next topic here is the second quarter financial update, and that's been prepared for us by Mr. McClure. And I would just like to say that as I was reading through this, I really appreciate the detail that he has put in here around how we're doing financially and why, where we're at with expenditures, and where we might have had some unforeseen things, and I really appreciate it. So I'd like you to speak to it.
Certainly. Do you want to take 5 for a bio break? You guys have been sitting for 2 hours.
Do you need a bio break? All right, take 5.
Sorry, Your Worship. Some squirming in your seats.
It's been a long evening. Yeah.
But we're almost done.
We're almost done. Yeah, we are.
Bio break.
A stretch break. Yeah.
You know,
Claire, take it away.
You said you wanted to ride in the back.
Okay, so here we are, and what we're looking at tonight is sort of where we landed as of June 30th. And one thing as we go through kind of some of the numbers, and I've got obviously my comments in the back, and so I'll take any questions that you have. And I think I've spoken about this with council before, but there tends to be a trend in most financial statements, but in particular in local government, of where things land, where percentages are, and it makes it kind of somewhat easier when you've got something that's out of line to be able to point to it analytically and be able to speak to it. Certainly in the current year, there's a lot of positives that are going on. Taxes were collected and in line, and they're in the same expectations as they were in the previous years. I don't know if it's okay if I talk about some of the other documents that we provided. And so Chris Jury, our deputy CFO, who's been helping me as we try to even improve on what information we provide council. And one of them that I wanted to point with taxes was a few things. One, Councillor Morrison had asked about, what's happening with deferred taxes as we see housing, assessed values increase, seeing cost of taxes going up and what we're seeing on that. And you will see that there is a upward trend. We're seeing about 10 almost per year that are starting to defer their taxes. And what was interesting too is that there was a couple more in the last couple of years where families, so those with dependents are also able to at a certain criteria, and we're seeing a few of those pop up. So I thought that was interesting. But again, on the overall basis, we are seeing an upward trend, and I think that's a common thing, and I think it's one of the reasons that the provincial government put that in as an option for those that as their houses, they've probably paid off their house, they maybe are on a fixed income, the income tax, the value of their home has increased so much, and as the cash flow demand of property taxes goes up, that this allows them to be able to know that they're likely property or housing rich, but maybe cash flow poor. So this is a way of allowing them to stay in their homes that they've had, and when likely that large cash inflow, when it happens, when they decide to sell, that those property taxes are then dealt with at that time. So, some of the other things that I wanted to point out, that we had some statistics going on for 2017 comparative to 2018, and we had a few more notices sent, which of course is going to mean that which is in line with some of the new homes we've got developed. So we've got some new residents, or new homes, I should say. Positive as well as we try to push towards is that not having people having a shock of, I've got to come up with $2,000 or $3,000 on my property taxes, and that's be able to have that pre-authorized payment. So again, we're seeing that increase. Online payments, also another tool that council, had directed in the strategic priorities to get us moving towards. And we've got that going, and we're seeing that increasing as well. In fact, almost a 10% increase year over year. And also on the offside, seeing that the payment processed at City Hall has decreased slightly as well. Homeowner grant applications, again, in line with what we were seeing as far as new requisitions being sent out. And the other part as well, seeing that almost or just over 7% are claiming those online. Again, if you've gone that pre-authorized payment, and then you can just go on your computer and claim that online, your homeowner grant, you don't need to come into City Hall at all. And certainly it can be a busy time, hard to find parking, those sorts of things downtown here. And so you're able to do that from the comfort of your own home. If you've got the pre-authorized payment set up and you're not doing your homeowner grant online, you're kind of good to go with the city. One thing that I thought was a real positive and sort of was counterintuitive to what we were hearing anecdotally about maybe some of the challenges in the community on people being able to afford their property taxes, and maybe why some of the numbers were down for people coming into the city to pay their property taxes, is how, what kind of penalties out there? How many people will be not paying their taxes by that, or paying them in full, I should say, by the July deadline date? And we actually saw in the current year a pretty significant drop of about 30 less people getting a penalty. And again, it's budget-wise, I prefer to see people that are being able to pay their taxes, but we're about $16,000 less in our actual penalties this year, which again, I speak to a positive of people being able to be pre-authorized, using the computer options, and getting those set up on time. I'd like to think that having our property tax notices in the paper to remind people, as much as there's maybe on a cash flow issue for the city, on a budget side, it's a bit lower, but I prefer to see our community paying those taxes on time and not taking that pretty hefty 10% penalty. So that was just a couple of items just on taxes, and a couple of statistics that we want to start putting in each year now that we've got that template set up. As far as revenue goes, things are in line with what we would expect. nothing really of surprise there at all. And again, I've got some of my comments there. I will slip down to general government, and one I just wanted to point out in particular was transportation services. We'll see that we're, and it's not always going to be a perfect world where you're at 50%. You might be closer on a 50% on protective services, where you're in that line of about 80 plus % of protective services budget is basically wages. So as that kind of rolls out, that can tend to be pretty close to that line of being 50% when you're at 6 months through the year. But transportation services, we had again another really strong snow demand year, snow removal demand year. A lot longer and less snow, but more frequently, more colder temperatures, which meant more sanding, and so we really certainly saw an increase in the cost of sand that we needed to use this year. But we, on the other side, we didn't see some of the snow removal like we did 2 years ago when we had that huge amount of snow where we actually had to start to remove it from areas, whether it was, not just downtown, but through other parts of the community where we started to get blocked in. So we did not have a lot of snow hauling this year, but we did see that offset with, again, with the ongoing sand costs that we had this year. And so if I go, again, if I can with council, just to go down and take a snapshot on what's happened on snow plowing, it's actually, to me, again, one of those fascinating sort of numbers as a trend goes, because we've had you can see the budget for the most part has stayed pretty consistent. We did have a pretty good lift because we had that big snowfall in 2017 in council. We were still at the time doing the budget, and we said, hey, let's put some money towards that because we knew we had pressure. And you can see that even when we did that, we ended up being significantly over what we even added to the budget. And again, we took that out thinking that we would be back to more of a regular pattern for snow. And you can see that we're slightly under last year's, but likely going to have some cost pressure on this budget based on the average amount of snow that we end up clearing, snow removal costs that we see mostly in December. But again, what I find somewhat fascinating is we were on the positive side for a number of years, and it's amazing to kind of watch the pattern. And again, as it moves forward, we'll be tracking this again. But a sense of on one side thinking, hey, this is great. We did do another graph, but it was too busy for me to put into this particular package, I thought. But it actually showed the offset where we see situations as in last year where we're over budget on the transportation because of snow removal, and we end up being under on parks and services. So in the same split in those years, you'll see the trend where we've got really low years of snow removal. We'll see an over budget on parks, under budget on transportation. So again, that whole idea that we want to keep our employees working all through the year where we can. And again, I would suggest to council that there's a much better use of our staff time, getting our gardens and our parks upgraded and doing that different work than pushing snow, which is going to melt in the end anyway. So that was, again, for me, other than that, I think most other things speak for themselves of where we're at. Things are, I think, in a very positive situation as we are, other than transportation services having a little bit of pressure. And I think that, as I noted earlier in my notes, as I talk about, is that we may have some pressure there by the time we get to the end of the year. Capital. And so capital, again, Hall Street fully underway. I think everyone can see that with the huge size of the hole that we have down at Front and Hall, the size of the outflows, the piping that we've got going in there, some of the manholes that we're putting in. It's pretty huge. And it's moving along, and likely, I know, not as fast as people would like. And I think that with some of the flagging flaggers we've got, we're trying to at least make it somewhat safe in that corner at Cedar, and I think that's a positive, and we're getting traffic moving along. And I think with the lights being out, there is a positive when you're not totally backed up with someone trying to turn left as they're heading north on Front there to turn left. That doesn't back everything up, and it's moving along. Again, on that side, the hope is that we're going to start seeing some of that work get completed there. They're in a real complex area as they put in these huge pipes and put in the services and connect to those large storm sewers that we put in. Again, it was noted in the star there, we only had an increase of 4.7%. Well, actually, it was 470%. It should have been 4.7 or 7 times the amount of outflow capacity we have now. So that's really important when you see that. And so some real positives that we're dealing with that, and we know and we appreciate and we thank residents and I guess residents, and not only that, but business as well, for their patience as we try to work through this. And I think in the next little while, we would hope that we'll push through that intersection and get to the other side. But again, as we've talked about her in the, that may not happen until the end of September, so we still got some time to go. But work is proceeding as much as we can. And I think the other side that was positive for the city was that we've got 2 different contractors tackling the work. So you're also now starting to see the island and the different concrete work and the parking lot being worked on. And as well, you'll start to see the plans for the park and all the rest of it down by the lakeside, not by lakeside, but by the Prestige there will start to get underway as well. So kind of tackling it from both ends. So we're trying to do the best we can, most expedient as possible, again with the goal that we'll have this all wrapped up by the end of the fall here.
Maybe I just add, because I think it's important, and I've heard other people ask about the cost of this, and just to reiterate, 67% of that project was paid for by an infrastructure grant, and the balance was paid by our normal reserves for the utility. So there is no taxation dollars going into that project. And the other thing I think people need to recognize is a lot of those underground infrastructure projects are driven as much by the asphalt above it. So if that asphalt is at end of life, that's when we want to do the underground, because our paving budget only allows us to pave once every 30 years. So that means if we don't do the underground utilities at that time, we're waiting another 30 years. So, that the decision of council would mean to let that area flood for another 30 years, which, certainly wasn't tenable, especially when we got infrastructure grants to make that level of improvements that we have.
When you say the 33% that's paid for by the city,
yeah,
it's no additional tax, but it's tax dollars that we've put in reserve.
It's fees from the water and sewer, and if we collect those to replace that utility work, right? So
it's out of that reserve then? The money we collect for water and sewer goes into a reserve for that, okay.
And again, we would have used some of the paving budget that comes mostly from the parking meter revenue, and in addition, we've got some community works fund as well.
So it's not property tax funded?
No, not at all.
Okay.
So we're lucky too that we're not getting big downpours of rain.
Yeah.
Even though we don't like it.
Well, yes, and although it would be nice to have had some rain this weekend, but no, I was thinking about that as well with the severe thunderstorm watch. I'm like, can we at least get the system in place before that happens? Yeah. And again, when we see tonight some of the potential development going on in that same corner, there's a lot going on in our community. Again, Nelson Care, some of the other places that are going to be starting to do construction, and again, full on, I think residential-wise in our community as well. And we are certainly seeing that in particular in Director Moreau's development services, where we're, I think, $50,000 higher just on development permit revenue, let alone what we're even seeing on the big spike on just building permit fees as well. So, a lot going on, and can see that continuing to fall into next year as well. A couple other items I'll just talk about. The city was successful in getting $75,000 grant, which I thought was really newsworthy for us to redo the airport pumps down there. So again, it's one of those things we've been wanting on the books, but now to get a grant like that really makes a real positive for us, especially as to take any pressure off that we can. We apply for as many grants as possible. So
where did that grant come from?
It's an airport improvement grant. I'm not sure which actually the funding source it is. Yes, yeah.
So will that mean that credit cards will be able to use?
That's correct. We'll be in the true century here, Councillor Cherbow.
We have 2 students down there now that pretty well run that for the pilots.
Yeah, they're not a business.
They're gone.
Yeah,
there's a fair amount of business down there.
And then just one of the big ones too, is just at the 3rd Street water main work. That's a pretty major project our staff's been undertaking, and they've been able to get 2 blocks are paved. The 3rd block is torn up right now, and they're going to be heading to Hume Street, behind Hume School there, with the plan that they want to get that all our work done and paid before the school ends. So the timeline's on for getting that work done. So that's some good work for our staff as well. And again, I don't know if one last one is just that I think you may have noticed as well in the past few years when we've had the sewer relining done, they've come in the fall, late fall, and you've seen it. And I just noticed this year with all the construction going on, they were actually here this year while all the construction was going on. I mean, it was good that we got them done and they're in early, and we've been successful in that. But it was just, again, I think an additional construction phase in our community this year that we haven't seen in the past. And so happy to take any questions.
Go ahead, Councillor Sherwood.
I wonder, talking about property taxes, is there, how many people or what percentage of people defer their taxes?
Well, I guess based on the numbers there at not very many exactly. I would say it's probably at 18 over 40. So what are you looking at? Maybe
just below the bottom, right there, next one.
4%.
Right there. I didn't even know there was a family with children deferral option. What's the requirement? You know what the requirement?
Yeah, it kind of states there you have to have a certain amount of equity and you have to have a dependent under 18 is the thing there. So family with children program, dependent under 18 or a student, and you have to have at least 15% equity in your home. Yeah, and again, like I said, seeing a few of those popping up.
So 118, that's the number of properties?
That's correct, or the number of individuals that are deferring. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thanks for a great report. It's such a great synopsis of what's been happening in the last quarter, and it's really good information. Thank you for putting that in one place.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to add that, some rumors go around the community that our finances are in disarray. I think this
Tell them to come to a council meeting.
Go figure where they get that.
You know what? Carry around a copy of the annual report and slap it on there and just say, there you go, have a look.
And again, Councillor Turbo, I'm easy to talk to, and I feel pretty comfortable.
I don't think they want to talk to anybody.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I think, certainly the focus by previous councils and this council on especially the infrastructure, like we're one of few communities probably across this country that actually are funding their infrastructure renewals with the fees that are collected. Not only are we funding those capital expenditures, we are also building reserves long-term, and we're now at inflationary or below inflationary levels. The council is able to double that paving budget again with no impact on taxation. We did increase the parking meter rate a little bit. Again, we would be one of very few communities that is able to do that. And then facilities, council is now spending over $1 million a year on facilities and again, done without any real impact on property taxes. So yeah, would be quite happy to talk to anybody that feels that we're not managing our finances.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Would someone like to move receipt of that report? Thank you, Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Warmington. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We're now going to talk about Recycle BC. And this report is also an excellent report. And just to say that Recycle BC is the provincial organization that we deal with, where we send our recyclables and they pay us for recyclables. And I was really interested in this report because it also speaks to the change globally in recycling and how we need to shift as a country and as a province and communities to what will be accepted and what won't. And earlier this year, or last year, we had some real bumps in the road when we were re-educating residents on what could be recycled and what couldn't, and when we couldn't pick up their bag or could pick up their bag. And if people would read this report especially, the restrictions on contamination and recycling have deeply increased, and it costs money to get rid of these products, and if we are not in compliance, then we pay extra for that. So I'm going to get the motion on the floor, and then I'm going to ask staff if they'd like to highlight any other parts of this report. So the motion is that Council receives the report on Recycle BC agreement renewal for information. Thank you, Councillor Daly. Second by Councillor Morrison. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure, I think some of the highlights are, the renewal, there's a slight increase. I think all of us collectors would probably want that a little bit higher. But we're, again, the way we have chosen to collect both our waste and our recycling by moving to a bi-weekly system and collecting with one truck. Again, I would suggest we have one of the most efficient collection systems in the province, and that's reflected in the fact that we haven't raised rates either for the tags or the annual fee for quite some time in both those categories. And I think that's the major change that we're looking at going forward is, again, just how they process recycling is they blue bags. They feel that causes them trouble on their processing lines and jams machines and creates a fair amount of labor. So they're requiring all collectors to move away from the blue bag program. So we're going to have to move to a slightly different system. I think it looks like it will still be co-mingled and probably in a bin and with your paper in a separate kind of sack to keep it dry and out of the elements. That will probably add a little bit more labor as we're collecting. But I think we're still looking to be able to do this quite efficiently with our own staff and like I said, an efficient system. In terms of collection, it's about $10,000 a week that it costs to collect. So we wanted to change that cycle. You're adding $10,000 a week. So if we collected bi-weekly, we'd be doubling that budget from about $260 to $520. So it's pretty significant cost to collect on all the homes we collect in the city.
I suppose it's convenient, good timing that we're going to be needing a truck in the next year or two, and then we're going to go to containers that will match up somehow.
Yeah, I think we're probably still feel a dual compartment truck is the route to go. And we just have super challenging terrain and also, for example, all of Fairview, most of that is in laneways, and that would be, we'd have to switch them to the front of their houses and go up one side, down the other side. So there's, we have a really efficient system now.
How does it, once you don't have bags, how's the tag system going to work with bins?
You don't tag your recycling, you only tag
right,
your
exactly.
garbage. Yeah.
Getting late.
Yeah, exactly. So we're good on that one.
Yeah.
So right now, we will, when the service agreement comes forward, we will bring that forward, and but we just want to give you a bit of an update for that.
Well, thanks for that. That's great, and I think that it's there's, again, with foresight in saying, okay, we know that things are changing, we know that we have a machinery that needs to be replaced, and we're going to position ourselves so we get the right equipment and are able to do things efficiently. So that's great. And as much as it was a pain in the neck to re-educate some folks on what was recyclable and what wasn't, it's going to pay off. So
people are going to be unhappy though when they complain buying bags. Now they're going to complain buying bins.
No, we'll have to supply bins.
Yeah, we'll have to supply people. Go ahead, Councillor Warmington.
Well, I was just wondering, I think I read in here that our contamination rate is currently in around 6%.
Yeah.
So we do have to make at least a 3% improvement
or lose it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's big fines. Yeah.
Yeah, and the bigger think the bigger environmental issue is this recycling material in many cases is sitting in warehouses, not being processed. It's not going overseas now to China. They're not accepting that. And, Recycle BC, because they've been pretty firm on managing those contamination rates, do have markets for their products, but other people were just throwing whatever in recycling, and those are being rejected, and they're not being able to be recycled. That's the bigger.
And we're having a larger discussion regionally at the regional district table around long-term, like what we're trying to position for is long-term future. So what are we doing, trucking recyclables all over the place? Is there a better way to deal with things? And maybe we need to shift majorly in that way too, so.
It's sure a mess out at 4 Mile on the weekend. People just throw the stuff in, stuff the wrong things in the wrong bins, and
that's going to stop because out at if the region goes into compliance with Recycle BC, there'll be some pretty strict regulations around that, and big fines. So all in favor of the motion, thank you, and no one's opposed. It carries. We now have we dealt with that before. Affordable housing. We have an affordable housing report here.
This one you might want to defer.
Yes.
I don't think we're going to have enough time to.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to defer. I think it needs some more conversation and really.
All right, seconded. Councillor Sherbo, all in favor? It's for deferral. Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Monroe.
Yeah.
Is that the last thing you were waiting for?
I should have said that before we waited that long.
What about the street closures, permanent policy?
Oh, that's a really quick little thing.
Yeah.
So that's, I spoke earlier about the new fee that was added in development services, about the change at BC assessment we can't get. Basically dealing with the closure of a road and sale of road right-of-way that's been closed, that we now have to go and get it appraised and sell it at that. So this is to make that change, to remove the BC assessment part and say that that's how we're going to value it, and it's not negotiable.
All right.
The value is set by the appraiser, and that's what the cost of it is.
Would you like to move that?
Sure.
Second by Councillor Morrison, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We already did the flag policy, and we have action items for council. Anybody have one thing they want to pull? Would someone like to move receipt? Thanks, Councillor Warmington. Seconder, please. Seconder. Councillor Sherbo, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have a couple of reports here from the finance department, the building department, and would someone like to?
I'll move receipt.
Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Seconder. Councillor Warmington, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. What do we got here? Agenda minutes. Cultural development. We have minutes from the Cultural Development Committee. Move receipt, please. Councillor Daly, seconder. Councillor Warmington, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We do have. Are people up for council reports tonight? Would we not? No.
Just one thing I wanted to announce, and that is the Nelson International Mural Festival opening Friday.
Friday, yeah.
6:30 in Hall Street Plaza, and it's running all weekend. Lots of music, and the artists are there, and it should be pretty. I can't find them all yet. I've seen about 4, but I think there's 9 or 10. So, looking forward to that.
Some are just underway.
Yeah.
And another thing that's coming up this week actually is that we have the negotiating teams for the Columbia River Treaty are going to start their negotiations here in Nelson, which is
Mr. Trump going to come?
No, but the lead negotiators for Canada and U.S. will be here, and they will. It's their very first meeting, so we're pretty pleased they're coming here. We have item released to the public, a motion released to the public, and it is that council approves the appointments of Ms. Berdine Yonker and Ms. Jennifer Mayberry for a term beginning September 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2019 to council's Advisory Planning Commission. So thank you to both of those women for volunteering, and we look forward to working with them. Could I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Councillor Sherbo, second by Councillor Warmington, all in favor. Motion carries, and we're done.
Well
That was a
done.
big agenda, and we did it. Whew.
Comment on the.
That was